We are live, Your Worship.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Council. I'd like to call to order this regular council meeting of May 14th, 2024 with adoption of the agenda. Someone want to make that motion for me? Councillor Devlin, Councillor Cherry, all in favor? Motion's carried. Adoption of the minutes of the regular council meeting of April 23rd. Councillor Devlin, Councillor Lusau, all in favor? Motion carried. Any business arising from those minutes? Seeing none, I'm going to move on to delegations and presentations. We have Angie Spencer with us to do a presentation on our financial statements. Angie, can I turn it over to you?
You sure can. Thank you very much, Worship, and thank you, Council, for having me here. I'm happy to share my screen if that's easier to walk through the financials that way.
Sure.
Yeah, I will just get those up here. Okay, so you should be able to see those now on your screen. So my name is Angie Spencer. I'm a partner with BDO, and we were engaged as the external auditors to come in and audit the City of Revelstoke's financial statements as at December 31st, 2023. And I'll just go through some of the highlights of the financial statements in my audit report, and then happy to answer any questions that you might have. So on page 2 and 3 of the financial statements is the independent audit report. Most important paragraphs is the first one that gives an overview of our audit opinion. We are proposing to issue a clean or unqualified audit opinion, which means that the financial statements are considered to be free of material misstatement and that they are presented in accordance with all the requirements of public sector accounting standards, which of course is the requirement there. These are in draft format and subject to your approval today. So I'm just pulling up now the statement of financial positions. So this is a summary of the assets, liabilities, and net financial assets, a snapshot, if you will, as at December 31st. Total financial assets came in at 55.4 million. That was up from 52.2 million in the prior year. Some notable changes. There was some shifting with surpluses this year of cash from cash and cash equivalents into portfolio investments. So you'll see there that in portfolio investments is sitting now at 39.2. That's where a large amount of your reserve funds are, of course, invested in earning higher rates of interest rates. Accounts receivable includes some, various amounts receivable, but also some outstanding grants and items that were received subsequent to year end. The investment in the Revelstoke Community Forestry Corporation, this represents the equity accounting in that entity. So any income that was earned during that fiscal period is added to the cost of your investment as a return on that investment. And you'll see the corresponding income side of that on your statement of operations. In terms of liabilities increased from 31.3 million up to just over 32 million during the current year. Some notable changes there. There was a new standard that was adopted during the current year, asset retirement obligations. All public sector entities, municipalities included in that, were required to adopt this standard. This was quite an extensive process that required inventorying all tangible capital assets that are held by the municipality and coming up with a best estimate on what the cost to eventually retire those assets are, and then present valuing that back to today's dollar. The idea or reasoning behind that is for better transparency and understanding from a budgetary perspective in terms of what the actual costs of those assets are, knowing that eventually some of those need to be retired. So note 20 gives a bit more detail around that. This is largely to do with asbestos that are held in some of the older buildings that will eventually need to be remediated, and also decommissioning of some wells. So total net financial assets came in at 23.4 million. In terms of non-financial assets, this is largely your tangible capital assets and infrastructure. That increased from 90.9 million up to 102.7 million. There was, several additions during the year, including capturing the assets that are owned as part of the Revelstoke Energy Corporation. Less amortization are included in that balance. I'm going to move on to the statement of operations. So this is the first column is the budgeted amounts. The middle column is the actual results for 2023 with the comparative numbers in 2022. So total revenues came in at 44.1 million. That was up from 35.6 million in the prior year. Some of the large fluctuations in that government and other grants increased this year. There was the one-time Growing Communities grant, 3.3 million that was received during the year, in addition to some increase in the MRDT rates for 2023, which drove up that balance. Another area, of course, investment and other income with high interest rates and the increase in portfolio investments. There's been a higher return on investment earned of just over 1.5 million. Expenditures came in at 30.1 million, up from 27.4 million in the prior year. Some of the more notable increases in there would have been just general. We're seeing across the board general increases in expenditures. There's also amortization, which is included in these balances, and accretion of that new asset retirement obligation. There was also some additional increases in promotional costs for arts and culture events that was new in 2023, including shuttle services. So that increased some of the costs around economic development services. So total revenues less expenditures came in with an annual surplus of 13.9 million. And then, of course, we brought in the net increased balance of the Revelstoke Energy Corporation. That was at 286,000. So total accumulated surplus at the end of the year came in at 126.8 million. So just a couple of items to note. I won't go through all of the notes to the financial statements, but there are some new notes that I wanted to bring to your attention. Note 1 in the financial statements just illustrates more detail about the first-time adoption of asset retirement obligations. We have restated 2022, our management has, in order to present apples to apples, if you will, on the financial statements. So this just provides detail of the impact and changes from what was presented last year. Note 2 is another change around financial instruments. There's a requirement to provide more detail around, risks associated with financial instruments in municipalities, and that's been provided in Note 2 and Note 6 to the financial statements. And then Note 8, one of the subsidiaries that are owned by the city is the Revelstoke Community Energy Corporation. During the year, this entity no longer met the accounting definition for government business enterprise. So effective December 14th, this entity has now been, for accounting purposes, consolidated into the results of the city. And this just provides an impact of what that the changes to the numbers were as a result of that. The only other thing I would highlight is there are some new schedules at the very back as required to illustrate Growing Communities grant funding and how what was received during the year, and then on a go-forward basis, it'll be disclosed in terms of what those funds were spent on. As at this time, there wasn't any, as at December 31st, there wasn't, that those funds were not yet spent. So that's all I had on the financial statements in my report. I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Council, any questions for Ms. Spencer? Councilor Palmer.
Thank you, Mayor Souls. Can you hear me all right?
We can, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Spencer, for the report and the information. I do have various questions. Unfortunately, I haven't had time to really go through it. When did the city first receive your audited report, the audited statements?
Sorry, like when did you receive this
Yeah, I apologize because I'm just,
Yeah.
trying to get some background information. So I just wondering, I feel a little bit ill prepared to tell the truth on providing comments because I haven't had the time over the weekend to dive deep. And I think we just received it, and maybe staff can let me know if we received it before. But I'm just wondering if somehow I missed it. I did miss some other documentation, and so I guess the question I had for you is,
Mhm.
when did you provide to the city? And I guess what I'm really more interested is, when did I first receive it? Was that on Friday? Are that my questions?
Yeah, so that would probably be a question for management in terms of when that was loaded or provided to yourself. We had met with management last week to finalize the audit in terms with our, in agreement with our timelines. There were some delays in terms of finalizing this year, but nothing substantial outside of, our usual, where we provide our final report a week in advance of council meeting.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So my first question is on the surplus. There looked like a variance of somewhere around 4 million between the budgeted and the actuals for 2023. Can you make some comment with why that why that big sort of differentiation of $4 million? It seems pretty substantial to me.
Yeah, so a lot of this, it's a great question. So there are a few notes that help try to illustrate that. So I'm going to just move back to the financial statement. So you're speaking to the statement of operations and just looking at the overall. Oh, okay, I see that. When you're coming up with your budget, that's obviously coming up with a zero budget. That's different than the way it's presented for public sector accounting purposes. So note 18 provides a little bit of detail there in terms of, what would be reconciling back for items such as long-term debt or amortization that aren't included as part of the budget. That's another area where, and management can comment further on this, but my understanding is investment income is an area that isn't easily budgeted or is often very conservatively budgeted. So there'll be a big variance there with the increase in interest rates. There are some funding and grant agreements based on the timing and when they're received that aren't kind of factored into the original budget amount. And amortization is another one that usually is an area that's not specifically budgeted for.
Okay, thank you. The operations expenses looks like it was 1.5 million over budget, and this might be more of a question for management, but again, it seems substantial, and I feel ill prepared to understand, to be able to explain that to the public. Or yeah. So yeah,
I would say that is more of a operations question than for management.
Right. Okay. Thank you. And then just a question to the mayor, Mayor Souls. I'm just wondering if there was a meeting that I missed where these items were discussed, and can you just correct me just in case I've missed something along the way?
Unless it was discussed in finance, I don't recall it being discussed in the council.
Right. Okay.
And I don't have, Mr. Weatherall, you're present, but do you recall any of this discussed in finance committee?
Are we talking, what are we talking about again?
Are we talking about the entire operation budget? Mr. Weatherall's here in the room, Mr. Council Palmer.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Mayor Souls. Yeah. So basically, the challenge that I have is going through this and a number of other things. And of course, we had a meeting last week, and I am feeling ill prepared to fully understand it, or not fully understand it, but to a reasonable level. And I'm trying to understand the huge variances on surpluses, accumulated surpluses of $4 million, and then the expenses of $1.5 million. Why that's occurred, and if someone could give me the Coles notes on that, that'd be great.
Okay, Mr. Weatherall, do you have any comment?
Well, I guess I could touch on economic development. So there was, like most of that is grant funded, for their expenditure, right? So, there is a variance there about 200 grand or so.
Okay.
Um, and then, for transportation services, overall, I think, that has to do with inflationary and just cost overall in terms of, like fuel and repairs and maintenance and supplies. I think we noticed a substantial difference there.
Okay.
And protection services, that includes the RCMP contract, which we did notice, yeah, there's definitely increases in the RCMP contract amount that we paid out in 2023.
Okay, and that was, some of that was with union changes and whatnot.
Yeah, and then of course, overall, there was wage increases across the board, with the 4% increase of QP wages, 2023, and benefits if they go along with that. Just kind of, anything else?
Okay, thank you for that. So Mayor Souls, or through the chair, I guess my other question is specifically on note 8, the Community Energy Corporation. And to be very blunt, you know, I guess from on a public meeting and when we're going through this, to me, that note is quite alarming. And it's interesting when I look at the numbers on note 8, a number of things, and I'm wondering if we could just sort of have a brief understanding, or what do these things mean? Are these liabilities against the city? And even the statement that RCEC no longer meets the accounting definition, if I could have clarity as to, well, what does that mean, and what's the impact on the taxpayers on no longer meeting the accounting definition? So if there could perhaps Ms. Spence could make a comment on what that definition is, and then give a sense of what on the major line items there, what that means to the taxpayers essentially.
Absolutely. Yes, great question. So without getting too technical, the Energy Corporation is 100% owned by the City of Revelstoke. For accounting purposes, if you are considered a government business enterprise, you are assumed to be completely self-sustaining and profitable in your own right, and providing a return on investment to that parent company. So for many years, we have, the city has used that modified equity method of accounting, which means that you just report on the balance sheet your initial investment, and any return on investment or increase in value of that investment overall is reflected on the balance sheet. If it becomes apparent that that entity is no longer a self-sustaining unit, that it requires support from its parent to sustain operations and to continue on, that changes its definition from a government business enterprise to a government unit. And a government unit is expected to be, for accounting purposes, consolidated into the results of the city, which means effectively assets are assumed, liabilities are assumed, and any income and expenditures are now reported within the city. So this adjustment and the numbers that you're looking at are note 8 illustrate the financial impact of consolidating that entity into the results of the city. So the overall, some of these numbers look quite large because, it's taking in all the capital assets, accumulated amortization to date. But the net impact for this year on the, bottom line or surplus balance for the city is $286,000.
Okay, thank you. And then through the mayor, thank you. That's helpful in understanding that accounting definition. So it's been my understanding on the time that I've been on council that RCEC has been this arm's length thing. We didn't have the as an individual councillor, I didn't have the direct responsibility of the oversight of the day-to-day operations and that kind of thing. So that was with the a board of directors. I understand. And so, and I guess where my concern is now, this is shifted over, is now the responsibility of the city is, if I'm understanding, the direct responsibility in the finances, just like we have responsibility for utilities, for example. And maybe that's a unit as well in a comparable kind of way. And so that's what I'm trying to understanding. And so there's that 200, you said there's the liabilities and I apologize for using kind of lay terms and if I'm getting them confused, because quite often things seem flipped around and they're hard to understand. So when I'm reading this list, there's cash and cash equivalents. It's in brackets. So I'm assuming that's cash in the bank or something that's real money that's sitting somewhere. And so if that's a positive amount, and then the investment in RCEC, I'm assuming that was a legal dollar that we bought an entity or something. So that's a theoretical, well, it's supposed to be real $1. So when I look at those two and say, well, all the rest feel like what a layperson might consider debt. So if I look at the tangible capital assets, so I think there was investments in the early days that maybe hasn't been recovered, so I can sort of understand that. But then when I start to look at things like accounts payable, so I'm assuming that's people that used to owe RCEC, now owe the city of Revelstoke, I'm assuming, on the accounts payable and accrued liabilities. Would that be accurate?
These are still debts that are owed, that RCEC owes.
Right.
But for the purposes, because they are requiring assistance in meeting those obligations from the city, this is now for accounting purposes been consolidated in to reflect, ultimately, to your point, a liability to the city, should they have to act on servicing all of this, these obligations.
Right. Okay. So these are all obligations then that now the city has a direct responsibility, no longer an arm's length responsibility for those liabilities.
I wouldn't put it that directly. From an accounting perspective, it's been consolidated in. This is still a legal obligation of RCEC.
Okay. Okay, that's helpful. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mayor Souls. I'm looking forward to hear whatever other comments other councillors have on the financial statements. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Any comments or questions from members of council regarding Ms. Spencer's report? Councillor Orlando.
Your Worship, just a clarification question that arose as a result of Councillor Palmer's questions regarding note 8. So under tangible capital assets, net of accumulated amortization, not depreciation, I understand this to mean that we are valuing the asset, the capital asset, at just over $2,061,000. So liabilities subtracted from that asset is that final accumulated surplus. I don't see a bottom line on that, but I'm assuming that's how we're deriving at $286,000.
Ms. Spencer, can you confirm that?
Your rationale is correct. So this is taking the book value from RCEC's financial statements. So this isn't the fair value of those assets or what it's been valued at now, but it's consolidating in the book value or the original cost of those assets. less the value of the debt overall. So you're right, the net impact is the 286,000.
Oh,
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Thank you for that. And why, I guess my question would lead to that is why would we not sort of factor in depreciation, what sort of an actual value would be at this point in time? Why do we go with the TCA of the original value? Or I don't know if I'm defining that correctly.
No, absolutely. And that is something that many people ask when it comes to accounting. You always use book value. So the public sector accounting standards require you to use cost and not fair market value when it comes to value assets. But that is something to, obviously take into consideration when looking at, if you are needing to settle obligations, what the fair value of the assets available are.
Yeah, just one more. And just on the line item above that, due to a related party, RCFC, I take it that to mean that RCEC owes RCFC, another city-owned corporation, just over $1.2 million.
That's correct.
Thank you.
all right. Any other questions from council? Seeing none, thank you, Ms. Spencer. Appreciate your report and value your way of doing auditing on our books. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to move on to item 6A, development permit and development variance permit regarding 1750, 1730 Trans Canada Highway. Mr. Simon, do you have a brief overview before we move on with this?
Your worship, yeah, no formal presentation today on any of the current planning files. We know council has a big agenda today, but here to answer questions and a brief overview of this file. It is a development permit and development variance permit application for a 33 dwelling unit employee housing building that would be split between the Ramada and the Marriott. And as you can see, the only variance that is requested with this application is with respect to parking. And it's not to reduce the minimum amount of parking spaces. It is to allow for shared parking between two different lots. So right now we allow for shared parking between two different lots if it's a commercial use, but we don't allow it for a residential use. So in this particular case, that is the only variance that has been requested. It complies with all other provisions of the applicable comprehensive development zone, and it complies with all provisions of the official community plan for a form and character development permit. And we are also issuing this as a environmentally hazardous development permit because it is in proximity of steep slopes. The proponent has submitted the necessary geotechnical reports to show that the site is safe for the intended use. And as such, staff recommend issuance of the permits.
Great, thank you, Mr. Simon. Someone want to put item number 1 on the table for me? Council Lusal, thank you.
I move that development variant permit DBP 2023-020 be issued at 1730 and 1750 Trans Canada Highway for the following variance to zoning bylaw number 2299, provisions of parking facilities. 1, to allow for shared parking on a property within 50 meters of a residential use.
For
residential.
Thank you. Seconder for the motion, please, Councilor Devlin. Any discussion on this motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Moving on to item number 2. Would you like to carry on with that?
Sure. I move that development permit DP 2023-014 be approved for the form and character and construction within an environmentally hazardous area for the construction of a 33-unit apartment building at 1730 and 1750 Trans Canada Highway. Subject to the following preconditions to issuance being met. A, that the owner register an access agreement on the title for both 1730 and 1750 Trans Canada Highway, allowing for unrestricted access to the parking area.
Seconder for the motion, please, Councilor Devlin. Any discussion on this motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion is passed. Item number 3, Councilor. Thank you.
I move that the owner provide security for due and proper completion of landscaping in the amount of 125% of the amount identified in the cost estimate to the city of Revelstoke in the form of cash or unconditional irrevocable auto-renewing letter of credit issued by a Canadian Chartered Bank or credit union prior to the issuance of a building permit.
Seconder for the motion, Councilor Devlin. Any discussion on this motion? Councilor Devlin.
Just wanted to thank Councilor Lucia for taking that one off my plate.
You're welcome. Awesome. Any other comments? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, motion carried. Thank you. Moving on to item B, development permit amendment, Revelstoke Alpine Village, 1222 Douglas Street. Do you have a brief overview on this, Mr. Simon?
Yeah, through your worship to all of council. So this is a development permit amendment application. You might see when you go down on Douglas Street, there's currently 26 row houses that are under construction. Since the time council initially issued the development permit, the proponent has purchased another portion of the property at the corner of King and Douglas. And with that, they are looking to extend the development to add another 5 row house units onto the development. So similar to the first phase, because these are kind of awkwardly shaped lots with the access oriented on 3 sides, we need some variances for the front and the rear yard setback. It's really due to the way that we calculate what is considered to be the front yard. So that is why you're seeing a variance for the front and rear yard setback from 6 to 3 meters. And in addition, there's variances for parking with this one as well. So the first variance is to reduce the number of visitor parking spaces from 1 to 0. So the development, as it was originally approved, did have sufficient visitor parking that would be available for this unit as well, because these 5 units will complement the existing 26 units that are under construction. So the visitor parking that is on site will be available for these 5 units as well. And then as well, looking at reducing the required off-street parking from 2 spaces per dwelling unit to 1. I do want to note that while it is a reduction of parking from 2 spaces to 1, for practical purposes, there will be 2 parking spaces per dwelling unit. So I know it's a little bit confusing, but we will have people parking on their driveway, and that portion of the driveway where it hits the city right of way is kind of called no man's land. So we have people throughout the community that are constantly parking in no man's land, and technically we can't count that as an off-street parking requirement. But for all intents and purposes, there will be 2 parking spaces allocated to each, one in the driveway, one in the garage. But we just can't count that one in the driveway because a portion of it is in city right of way. So that is why you're seeing the variance for the parking, but for all intents and purposes, there will be 10 parking spaces provided on site for this development. So staff do recommend issuance of both the variance application as well as the development permit application to bring the total number of units associated with this development from 26 to 31.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Simon. Appreciate that. So I want to put the first motion on the table for me, please.
Spoke too soon. Should have let him keep going. I will move that development variance permit be issued at 1222 Douglas Street for the following variances: zoning bylaw number 2299, front and rear yard setback requirements to reduce the minimum front yard setback requirement from 6 meters to 3 meters, to reduce the minimum rear yard setback requirement from 6 meters to 3 meters. Required off-street parking to reduce the minimum number of off-street parking spaces from 2 to 1 per row house dwelling unit, and to reduce the minimum number of off-street visitor parking spaces from 1 to 0.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councilor Luciano. Any discussion on this motion? Councilor Orlando.
There should be a question through the chair of staff regarding the variance B, off-street parking. So that's to reduce from 2 to 1. The staff report notes what Director Simon was just mentioning, that in that the new not parking spaces, but clearly in the plan and in the renderings, parking spaces are located partially on private property, partially on city property. And my question is, with section B, is that one of the variances? Is that a variance within this reduction of 1 to 2 or 1 to 0 for visitor parking?
Mr. Simon.
Through your worship, so there is no visitor parking being proposed as part of these 5 units, but they will have access to the visitor parking that is a part of the whole development. But from the parking space requirements 2 to 1 per dwelling unit, that is where 1 parking space is going to be provided in the garage, totally off-street parking. But the other parking space that's on the driveway that would typically be counted towards off-street parking can't technically be counted because it's not fully off-street, because half of it is in city right of way. So the first 3 meters of the driveway is on the private property, and then the next 2.5 meters is on city right of way before it hits the sidewalk. So that no man's land that everyone in the city, you drive around, it's pretty easy to see everyone uses it for parking. We just can't technically count that as off-street parking. So we encounter this really frequently. Someone applies for a business license for a bed and breakfast. they can't use the parking in that portion of the city right of way to count towards their off-street parking. So, we can't allow that to say you don't need a variance, but it might be rationale for council to consider that for all practical purposes, there's 2 parking spaces, so the variance can be supported, but we just can't technically count it when we're doing our evaluation against the zoning bylaw. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Yes, I do understand that. I guess, to drill down to my question is focusing on, your worship through the chair, the variance and what part of that, whether or not any part of that is focused on taking, this right of way, which people currently park on, and turning it into a private, driveway, although it is located on city property. I understand that these are not counted within the proposed variance as a full complete parking space. Nevertheless, it does offset that parking space, and it also does raise other implications in the future. For example, as Director Simon mentioned, somebody trying to meet their parking requirements if they were afforded the opportunity to access off a roadway, they could suddenly make them because driving straight in allows you enough space in conjunction with the side going across that right of way there, or for example, moving the sidewalk out from where the de facto sidewalk is. But it does clarify my question. Thank you so much.
Okay, Councilor Palmer.
Thank you, Mayor Souls. So yeah, continuing on that, my questions are around the parking components there as well, and somewhat creative rationale. One question I have is on this so-called no man's land, which actually is the taxpayers' land. Are we, by doing this, making a commitment to the development, to the owners or whoever acquires these units, that they have a right to be parking on the city right of way?
Simon?
Through your worship, Councilor Palmer, no. And I just want to clarify as well, this isn't rationale to support the variance. We make really clear in the staff report that it's not rationale. So we don't want to establish a perceived precedent that you can park on city right of way and use that to support parking variances. But just again, for practical purposes, you drive around the city, a lot of people do park in that quote unquote no man's land. But if we didn't require a variance and we said, yeah, you know what, for practical purposes, you got 2 parking spaces, then the city would be making a commitment saying that that parking space is yours. By requiring the variance from 2 to 1, that portion of city right of way is always ours to use, as we will. So if the city ever needed to use it for any purpose in the future, the proponent has sufficient parking should the variance be supported because they've gone through this process to apply for that variance.
Should follow up, Councilor Palmer?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Souls. On the parking, and it's because I'm just operating just strictly off the laptop, it's a little bit tricky for me to see the reports at the same time. But so the only genuine parking stall, is it in the garage? Then there's no outside parking components that would be in the garage. Is that accurate?
Mr. Simon?
Through your worship, Councilor Palmer, yes. So the only off-street parking space that is counted is the one in the garage. But again, for practical purposes, people will be using the driveway for parking unless it poses an issue with city operations, at which point it would be a bylaw enforcement matter.
Yeah. And I get that. So through the mayor, I definitely get that. So every driveway has an area that might appear as private property, or people will park on a regular basis. So I get that component of that. It's just on the long range of where we're going. Mayor Souls in through to council. So one of my concerns on the parking, and then just on how the development and how we're communicating as the city, or not communicating. I was a little bit last meeting 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, was not the special meeting, but the other one. There was questions about trees and stuff. And I noticed on this particular parcel, they're well underway on ground preparation. I think they're assuming that they're going to get the variances and that this is just a shoe-in. I was troubled also that there was a number of mature trees that basically the vegetation has been nuked in the area. And we, as was mentioned with the discussion that we had previously, is we don't have any bylaws to ensure that we're protecting the natural assets that we have within Revelstoke, and that's concerning to me. And then when I looked at where some of those trees came down, appeared to be very close, if not on the border, and possibly on public property. And it seems that the pendulum has swung from maybe 5 years ago where we were very anti development. Not, it was very difficult. We were being criticized left, right, and center. And now today, and a lot of it's very, very good, but we've swung to an extreme to the other side and almost bending over backwards to give developers whatever they want, and that their assumptions going. So the concerns that I have with parking, and I'd be interested in what other councillor members have, but this parking dialogue keeps on coming up, and I'm fine with the variance setbacks. I sort of wonder about the parking, if it would have been better, in behind the building, and keeping some of the aesthetics of the area rather than just taking down all the vegetation and putting up more and more buildings. So those are some of the concerns. But on the question I have through to the council members, like we're making parking variances so frequently, and it's just like everyone is this sort of ad hoc kind of thing. And the question came up again, the previous regular council meeting, about potential parking strategy, and it's I think staff has that in their their vision in the future. And I'm just sort of wondering if we need to be tempering back a little bit on parking variances until we actually understand what we're doing as a city, rather than these things that are all over the map. And I just wonder if any other councillors have any comments regarding parking or any concerns that they have, because it seems like each one we're venting it as we go along.
Any comments from council? Councillor Devlin.
Through the chair to address Councillor Palmer. As we keep hearing and keep being told, it is kind of part of the zoning update that is coming along that will have a change in what are honestly very outdated parking variances or parking requirements. So I think until then we have I wouldn't be comfortable with saying we need to temper back as a whole, because I think we have to take them as a piecemeal value, because that's kind of the nature of what we're dealing with when we're dealing with outdated policies. But that policy is in the process of being fixed and should be significantly reducing the amount of parking variances we get, according to staff. So I'm willing to take them at their word for that and see what happens after the zoning bylaw is done.
Councillor Stickners.
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Palmer. I think one of the other issues that we're battling with here is the province keeps on passing forward this legislation, such as later on in our agenda, we'll see Bill 44, which is allowing up to 3 to 4 units per lot. So yes, parking is going to continue to be a contentious issue, but I think staff is just doing the best that they can given the resources that they have, and that in due time we'll hopefully address the parking issue. But in the meantime, we're going to have to be looking at these issues on a one-by-one basis, and we cannot make a blanket policy until we're at that point.
Anyone else have a comment? Councillor Chair, did you want to say something? We're not forced to answer.
Yeah, no, thanks, Your Worship. For decades we've lost development because of parking regulations. They haven't been updated, as Councillor Devlin said. And I believe the province took away the municipal powers to deny development due to parking regulations, if I'm remembering that correctly. Personally, I'm in favor of this. I do understand the neighbors' concerns. But respectfully, when it comes to parking, I think we're more in need of housing than we are of parking at this moment.
All right, I'll ask Councillor Orlando. Go ahead.
Well, Your Worship, just to check when trees are removed as part of the process, is a permit required? Just to double check, as part of the planning going ahead, I haven't driven down there lately to see what's on there. Have trees been removed here, or were they on the private section of the property?
There was a couple trees along Douglas Street, and Councillor Palmer was going along there and saw them being taken down, and actually showed me a video of that very close to the sidewalk, whether they're on city property or on private property, I don't know. And they may have been hazardous, but we don't know at this point. Do you want to elaborate on that at all, Councillor Palmer? And then I'm going to go to Mr. Simon.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So it's, I mean, I think the dialogue is warranted. I guess those are the questions. I put them out there, and some concerns I have. One question I have through to the planner is if council denied this and said, okay, you'll have to have the two parking sites, what's the impact on the developer if that was the case?
Mr. Simon, comment?
Through your worship to Councillor Palmer, I'm speculating a little bit, but the developer would also have to go back and amend their drawings to comply with the minimum zoning bylaw requirements. They might wait until we're through our comprehensive zoning bylaw rewrite. As has been indicated, our parking regulations are 40 years old.
Right.
That's why we're seeing so many variances for it right now. You will see less staff support for variances for parking after we get through our zoning bylaw rewrite and do a parking management plan and flush out our cash in lieu for parking a little bit more. So still a lot of work to be done on that front, but you may end up losing a unit or two if the developer wanted to proceed right now under current zoning regulations without allowing for the variance. And then we also might end up being overparked on the site because they'd be providing 2 off-street parking spaces and then still have that off-street parking space. Well, I shouldn't say off-street, that half on-street, half off-street parking space that is in and out of the city right away.
Right. Okay, yep, thank you, Mayor Souls.
Councillor Orlando, did you have follow-up? Did we answer all of your questions?
Your worship, yeah, not really follow-up, but just a restatement. I'm just looking at satellite imagery here, and I wasn't referring to Douglas Street. I was actually referring to King Street, and that's where the frontage will be for these driveways.
Right.
You never know with zoning maps and where the pins actually are versus what they say, but it looks a lot like to me that in the area in question, the public right away, there are trees within that public section, which will now be de facto private driveways. I have not been down there. They may be standing there and looking pretty, so I'm just seeking clarification more directly as to whether, as these are removed, we are sure that if they're private property, there's a process. If they're public property, there's another process. If we are clear on which is which in this instance.
Councillor, or Mr. Simon, comment?
Through your worship, Councillor Orlando. So on the private property portion, if a property is designated as environmentally hazardous or environmentally sensitive, so if there's steep slopes, it's hazardous, or if it's in proximity to a riparian area, then that would be environmentally sensitive. Then you would need a development permit for removal of any trees. The proponent did have a qualified environmental professional prepare a report, go through, verify that there's no environmentally sensitive portions of the land, and they did work to retain all the mature trees on the perimeter of the site and on the slope of the site at the rear. So there were a lot of mature trees that were retained. And for any development in the right of way, so there is works and services that are going on at the site, underground utilities, etc. There would be permits that are needed for removal of any trees within the public right of way through our public works department. Yeah, so we have a different permitting system, but this is something, again, another thing that's on our docket is to examine a tree removal bylaw, but then we got to consider if that's a route we want to go in light of wildfire prevention efforts that we're going to be undertaking. So those can kind of be at odds. So interesting times right now, but for the time being, private property, you may need a development permit. Public property, you need a permit through our public works department and our parks department.
Okay. Do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, Your Worship, just to hammer right down for crystal clarity. So trees have been removed in this section that we're talking about in the public right away, because again, haven't been down there in a long time, don't know what's up or down, but in this King Street right away where we're looking to put driveways on the public right away, it looks like there were trees in there and no longer there. I don't know, that's the clarity I'm seeking.
Any further comment?
Through your worship, I'm not aware specifically where the trees were located that have been removed, because again, the aerial images that we have don't necessarily, as Councilor Orlando indicated, delineate the specific property boundaries. Staff can certainly go look and we can follow up with our Public Works Department to see if any permits have been pulled for pulling trees within the city right away. It's generally an effort that's undertaken through the Works and Services process when they're going through that with our Public Works and Engineering Department.
So Councilor Palmer, Councilor Stapleton, and Councilor Lucia.
Thank you, Mayor. So just for, through to Councilor Orlando, the trees are gone, on that street. And, from my lay eye, it looks like they were very close to the boundary, whether they were on the city right away or I could not say, but the trees are gone. And then just to comment through to the mayor, I just note that Councilor Stapenhurst, is not viewable on the live streaming. My empty chair is very viewable, but Councillor Stapenhurst isn't, so I don't know if somebody can adjust the camera, it might be useful. Thank you.
This is me.
How's that now?
Still can't see on the top.
Here we go. Part of them's there. We'll readjust my table and move things where I go back and get everybody in for next meeting, but thanks for bringing that up. Councilor Stapenhurst, you have
I
comments?
was just gonna say that if, yeah, thank you through the chair to Councilor Orlando. If he was, if he's really concerned about the trees and the tree lines, you know, he's more than welcome to make a motion to defer this to a later time.
Okay, comment made. Councilor Lucia, you have comment?
Thank you, Myrtles. With questions through to Mr. Simon, with the not on-street or not off-street parking, is there enough space to use that and not block the sidewalk?
Through Councilor Lucia, so 5.5 meters is the minimum length requirement within our zoning bylaw, in between the right of way and the portion on private property. They do meet that 5.5 meters, so there should be sufficient. However, if you have someone there in a big work truck that has an 8-foot bed, might be a little tight, but it does become a bylaw enforcement matter at that point that Mr. Gibbs and his team would be following up on if someone ever encroached over the city sidewalk, just like anywhere else in the city, as it becomes a bylaw enforcement matter.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any more comment on the motion on the table? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All those in favor? Opposed? Note that Councilor Orlando is in opposition. Balance of council's in favor. This motion passes. Item number, I'm sorry. Councilor Palmer, were you opposed or in favor?
I was opposed, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, no, Councilor Palmer and Councilor Orlando were opposed. All right, moving on to item number 2. Someone want to put that on the table for me? Councilor Devlin.
I'll move that development permit amendment be issued for form and character for the construction of 31 row house dwelling units at 1222 Douglas Street. That's it.
That's it. Seconder for the motion, please. Councilor Lucia, any discussion on this motion? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All those in favor? Opposed? So who's opposed here?
Your worship, just give me 1 second.
I'll go again. In favor, please raise your hands. Okay. And Councilor Orlando?
Yeah, I'm just catching up on the
Okay.
resolution too, yeah.
In favor?
Mhm.
All right, this motion passes unanimously. Number 3, Councilor Devlin.
Move that the owner provide confirmation of lot consolidation for lot 1, block 18, section 34, township 23, range 2, west of the 6th meridian, Kootenai District Plan 9504, prior to issuance of a building permit.
Seconder for the motion, please, Councilor Lucia. Any discussion on this motion? Saying none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Item number 4, last one. Councilor Devlin.
I will move that the owner provide a security for the due and proper completion of landscaping in the amount of 125% of the amount identified in the cost estimate. The city of Revelstoke cash or unconditional irrevocable auto renewing letter of credit issued by a Canadian Chartered Bank or credit union prior to the issuance of the building permit.
Seconder for the motion, please, Councillor Luciano. Any further discussion on this motion? Councillor Palmer?
Thank you, Mayor Souls. So this is a resolution that we've seen it's a pretty routine kind of thing. It's interesting, there is the contradiction, we take out the vegetation, then we force a replanting kind of thing. And I'm just flagging that. I'll be in favor of this. It is routine. I will be in favor of the motion. I think as we continue to grow and we're seeing record-breaking development, that we really, as stewards for the city on behalf of the taxpayers, need to have a little pause on how what we're doing to the ambience of our city overall, and that's of concern. And just for clarity, that's the reason I was also opposed to the variances, is because it's too ad hoc and we're having this incremental destruction of our natural assets. But yeah, thank you very much.
All right, thanks for the comment. Any other comments on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Simon. Appreciate the overview and the help. Moving on to announcements from Mayor. I just want to say thank you to Okanagan Nation Alliance. This morning, we're invited down to salmon and sturgeon release, and to watch the celebration and to be part of it was very, very nice, and to understand the reasoning behind it. Just incredible what the ONA is able to do with their hatchery and their release. So honored to be part of it and to see it, and grateful for the number of students that were there this morning to be part of it. And they all got a chance to be hands-on to release salmon fry. So it was great. Just want to say thank you to everyone involved in putting that together, and for the community coming out in droves for that. Moving on to 9A bylaws, tax rate bylaws. Someone want to put that motion on the table for me, please. Councillor Luciano?
I move that the 2024 tax rate bylaw number 2381 be adopted.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councillor Staphenhurst. Any discussion on this motion? We've gone through all three readings, now adoption. Our tax rate is set, so adopting this will put things in motion. Seeing no comments, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. 9B, zoning amendment bylaw 2380. Someone want to make that motion? Councillor Cherry.
Move that zoning amendment bylaw number 2380 be given a first reading.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councillor Luciano. Any discussion on the motion or anything that you would like to add? I forgot to ask Mr. Simon just before we go.
Through your worship to all council, we do have a brief presentation, but I'm more than happy if council wants to, if they're comfortable with the report, here to answer any questions, but I also have a presentation if you guys would like. But again, I know it's a heavy agenda, so I will leave it at your discretion.
Somebody want to see the presentation? Yes, please. We've got 3 councillors that would love that, so thank you.
Thank you, your worship. So this file is with respect to zoning bylaw 2380, which is zoning amendments to address the recent provincial legislation Bill 44. So a little bit of background, get into some discussion, and then conclude with the staff recommendation. So Bill 44. Bill 44 is legislation that requires us to allow for up to 4 units per lot in all what the province calls restricted zones within the city. So legislation received royal assent on November 30th. Right now, any zone that only allows for either single detached dwellings or duplexes, 2-unit dwellings is what the province considers to be a restricted zone. So we need to amend those zones. And the way that it works is on any lot that is 280 square meters or less, you have to allow up to 3 units. On anything that is over 280 square meters, you have to allow for up to 4. So staff gave a presentation to council back in January with a bit of an overview of this legislation. So some of this may be a bit of a repeat. So I do apologize for that, but just to give you some context, when we're talking a 280 square meter lot, the 25 by 100 foot lots in the downtown and the central Revelstoke area, that's about 230 square meters. So you can picture 3 units on there. The new Williams Gate lots, average lot in south side, you're looking 400 to 550 square meters. That's where you're getting into, we gotta allow for up to 4 units per lot. So the minimum density provisions do not apply in the following scenarios. So properties with heritage designation under section 611 of the Local Government Act. Now, that is not the same as properties in our heritage conservation area that are established under section 615 of the Local Government Act. So important nuance to understand there. So the Mountain View School, the old school site there with the old school eatery, that is a designated heritage property under section 611. So the legislation wouldn't apply to properties like that. Now that property is commercial, so it's not the best example, but you can, I think, gather what I'm saying. Properties that aren't connected to water and sewer are exempt from the legislation, and properties where a private building scheme restricts the density are also exempt. So as staff kind of went through what we were required to do, the province released a whole bunch of information. And for us, we had to go through and identify all the zones that constitute a restricted zone under the zoning bylaw. So the classic R1 zone is a pretty obvious example. The R1A zone, which is very similar, but allows for slightly smaller lot sizes. The R2, R2A zones fall within this category. Our mobile home subdivision zone, which is the Johnson Heights Mobile Home Park, that falls within this category as well. One of our rural residential zones and 3 of our comprehensive development zones all are qualified as a restricted zone. Now, staff did review this with legal to make sure that we are on side with the new legislation. It is new, so there is some interesting nuance to it. You know, a comprehensive development zone that's broken up into different sub areas. Does the legislation apply to that? You know, for the stoked living, that's one example. We have sub areas within there where only single family dwellings are permitted. So in discussing with legal, it's our understanding that that would not apply to those sub areas because the zone as a whole already does allow multi-unit dwellings. So it would not count as a restricted zone, which is good because that would definitely create a very challenging situation. Infrastructure, roads are already put in, the community's already been consulted on those developments, so definitely would throw for a bit of a wrench. So the way staff propose addressing this legislation, so we have until June 30th to get this done. And we still need to send this off, should council give for second and third reading today, we still got to send it off to the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure for sign off. They have already approved the amendments in principle. They're just waiting for it to be at third reading so they can affix their signature to the bylaw. But it is a big process, and we didn't have a lot of time to really delve into this as information was rolling out up until, you know, February, March, April this year. Even as late as May, we've still been working with the Ministry of Transportation to sort out what their approval process is for this. So very interesting times to say the least. And because of that, the way staff recommend approaching this is, let's do a round of amendments right now to the current zoning bylaw. Let's do them in the least significant way that we possibly can, which basically means allowing duplexes with suites, similar to what we already do in the Big Eddy. Everywhere there is zoned R2A, Southside neighborhood. So it's really just extending those allowances to Arrow Heights, as well as extending those allowances to Columbia Park. So if we allow duplexes with suites, that is what we consider to be the least significant way to comply with the legislation. Now, with that, second step to this would be working with the community and saying, do we want to be more flexible in how we accommodate this density that we are now mandated to accommodate by the province? Do we want to say instead of a duplex with suites, we're okay with you doing 4 row houses? We're okay with you doing a 4-plex. We're okay with you doing a triplex and a detached garden suites, that we give some flexibility. So as we've been working through our comprehensive zoning bylaw rewrite project, through the coffee chat conversations that we had with the community, we did 14 different meetings, and this came up in every single one of them. And we had a conversation with them to explain this 2-step approach that staff were proposing. And we got some really good feedback where a lot of people, you know, there was some support for incorporating some flexibility. Then some people also had some reservations about it. So as kind of step 2 to this, we want to keep doing that work, engaging with the community to see whether or not there is an appetite for flexibility and how we accommodate this new mandated minimum density allowance per lot. So as we continue to move through the zoning bylaw project, the way that the zoning bylaw is currently drafted, we would be recommending kind of a middle of the road approach. The province has come and said, give ultimate flexibility, leave it up to the owner, let them do 4 units in any way they want. Our approach today is let's put as many restrictions on it as possible. And our approach tomorrow with the zoning bylaw rewrite project is Right now, we're saying staff have proposed somewhere down the middle. Allow 4 units per lot, but in no more than 2 buildings. But that will be a consideration for council sometime in the fall or the winter when the whole zoning bylaw project is brought forward. So you can see how it starts getting a little bit confusing because we have a lot of pieces moving at the same time. But for now, the bylaw that is before council today is just to extend the allowances that we have in Southside and the Big Eddy, where you can do a duplex with suites, to all restricted areas within the city. So with that, staff recommend that the bylaw be read a first time, and then a second time and a third time, at which point we will send it to the ministry for final sign off and bring it back to council on May 28th for final adoption. So thank you. Happy to answer any questions that you have.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Simon. Appreciate that. Council, any questions for Mr. Simon regarding this? Councilor Cherry?
Thanks, Your Worship. Through the chair, Your Worship, so Mr. Simon, I just want to ensure that the STR zone properties that are currently spot zoned won't all of a sudden have the ability to have 4 units of STRs as of this.
Through your worship, Councilor Cherry. So most of those properties are already developed with 1 single family dwelling and maybe a suite. So they'd have to kind of knock down the house to put 4 units on there. The likelihood of that, probably pretty minimal. But let's say it did happen. Under the current zoning regulations, a short-term rental is only allowed within those spot zones within a single family dwelling. And they're only allowed 1 per lot. So it would not be expanding allowances to increase the number of short-term rentals.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Palmer?
Thank you, Mayor Souls, and thank you to Mr. Simon for the report and for all your work in trying to keep abreast of what's happening. Again, I'd just like to publicly acknowledge that your department's doing an outstanding job of addressing these things, and again, have been proactive in the past. I just to comment through to council and the public, I just feel that it's absolutely irresponsible of the provincial province of forcing this in such a short term. We are blessed because we have a planning department that's doing lots of great work, but there's going to be lots of mistakes made in the province. And I think, I hope this becomes a major dialogue at UBCM in the fall, because forcing things without understanding, without meaningful consultation with communities, I feel is quite irresponsible, especially for something that just has such widespread implications to communities. Again, I applaud the work that our planning department staff have done on this. Thank you.
Thanks, Councilor. Any other comments on the motion on the table? Councilor Orlando?
Your Worship, a question for staff through the chair regarding the breakdown of CD zones and the rules, the details in the CD zones. I just wanted to seek more of an understanding on the ones actually listed versus the full spectrum of them. And sorry if I'm not picking this up, but I'm just seeking rationale on. To be clear, these are the existing numbers, not the proposed future numbers. Number one, because we've consolidated them. And secondly, why some are included and others, I just don't understand why we'd have some listed and not listed, and just seeking an understanding of that.
Mr. Simon?
Through your worship, Councilor Orlando. Yeah, good question. And so the first step that we had to do to figure out how to address the legislation was figure out which zones in the bylaw currently constituted what the province refers to as a restricted zone. So a restricted zone is a zone that only allows for either a single family dwelling or a 2-family dwelling. So we had to go through and figure out all those zones. So those three CD zones, the only uses when you go and look at them in the zoning bylaw that they permit is a single family dwelling. So the city historically had adopted 3 CD zones that were just intended to accommodate a single family dwelling on a very, very small lot. So not really something that warrants a CD zone. So that's why we'll be cleaning that up as part of the comprehensive rewrite. But for the time being, they qualify as a restricted zone, and as such, they need to be amended under the new legislation. But the other zones do not qualify as restricted zones in our discussions with legal.
Okay. Follow up, Councilor?
Your Worship, I have another question, not a follow-up question, but I'd let anyone else go first if they have questions.
Go ahead. Thank you.
Your Worship, through the chair, a question of staff. Just for clarity, because I know during the zoning bylaw rewrite process, one of the first questions people have had is about manufactured home parks and wondering about the changes or not that'll be happening there. As part of this change here, R5A is mentioned, but not R5, and the majority of manufactured home parks are in R5 to prevent any miscommunication, or hopefully prevent any miscommunication and aid communication on why that is, and put anyone else's fears to rest. And particularly because the wording of this section 8 under R5A is a bit different than the other ones. If I'm living in a manufactured home park and I'm wondering what this means for me, can you explain the exclusion of R5 from this change?
For sure. Through your worship to Councilor Orlando, so the legislation specifically excludes manufactured home park zoning. Now, our zoning that is in the Johnson Heights area, the R5A zone, is not expressively only manufactured home park zoning, because it's all individual lots that have been subdivided where the owner owns the land as well as the unit on the land. So because that zone allows for manufactured homes, but as well as single family homes and 2-family zones, it has been deemed to be a restricted zone, and therefore we are required to accommodate the mandated minimum density now. We did actually have this specific conversation with the province through a series of webinars, and this was actually a question that did stump them for a minute, and then as we followed up and met with them again, they did verify that the zone that allows for subdivision, that allows for multiple dwelling types, not just manufactured homes, would qualify as a restricted zone, and as such, we have to accommodate the 3 to 4 units per lot now. But just to be clear, for the R5, where it's strictly manufactured home zoning, you can't do anything besides a single wide or a double wide. No changes there.
Right.
All right, any other questions regarding the motion first reading? Councilor Orlando.
Your worship, also on R5A, just a quick detail question through the chair of staff. Under BC Building Code, the foundation requirement here is prescriptive. BC Building Code CSA Z240.10.1. Is this a change from the current requirement or not? And just a bit more clarity on that requirement.
Through your worship, Councilor Orlando, no change. What we had done with this amendment is we went into the conditions of use within each applicable zone, stripped them out, put them back in. We tried to make the amendments in the least significant way possible while still being on side with the legislation. We're going through this huge zoning bylaw rewrite process. That's why we didn't want to make any changes beyond those that were absolutely necessary to actually comply with the legislation. So no immediate changes for building code or any building standards for the manufactured home parks.
Follow up.
All right, your turn to follow up.
Okay, Councilor Stickers.
Thank you. Through the chair, dare I ask about the impacts on parking?
Please, just
Through your worship, to Councilor Stapleton. So minimum parking standards as they currently exist, which range between 1.5 parking spaces and 2 parking spaces per dwelling unit, generally speaking, will be required. Now that said, the province has been very clear with this legislation that we cannot use conditions of use, so things like minimum parking requirements, usable open space setbacks, building height, floor area ratio, all those tools that planners love to use. We cannot use those in a way that is overly restrictive that would negate the density from being realized. So this is very new territory for planners and developers, and that's where we have to be very careful. We have to be very careful with our parking regulations overall, because one of my fears is if we are continuing to be so restrictive on parking, the province is eventually going to come in and say no more mandated minimum parkings throughout the province of BC. And so we have to be very cognizant of that, because you can definitely see the writing on the wall right now with how this has been laid out.
Thank you.
Great. Any other comments? Councilor Orlando.
Your worship, I wanted to gather staff's thoughts on a question regarding the primary form laid out in the bylaw of essentially duplex building with secondary suites underneath. I know that the province has indicated that they don't want, they'll be looking for any sort of restrictive actions on the part of any individual municipality so as to that would undermine the spirit or the intent of the new provincial legislation. And my question is, that form seems to be fairly common through a range of zoning forms here, including ones that will have much bigger properties, bigger areas to build. And I'm seeking to gather thoughts from staff regarding what they've heard from the province on this proposal going forward, and the potential to to change in the proposal here. For example, on certain zones that have more area or have some sort of threshold area for the property that would allow for different forms than this one. Because in my mind, in some instances, if the goal is housing or more density or more people on a plot of land, a duplex with suites underneath might be limiting in some areas, certainly appropriate in other areas. Yeah.
Your Worship, Councillor Orlando, excellent point, really, really good point. And the province has been really clear. They've said, allow the amendments and allow them in the most flexible way that you possibly can. Now, with that said, this is why staff are proposing the two-step approach. The one thing we can control as a community is the development form that these 4 units do take. And it is, staff's opinion right now that because we're in the middle of this big comprehensive zoning bylaw rewrite process, we don't want to impact the integrity of that process. And we want to make sure that the community doesn't feel that this stuff is just being jammed down their throat, that they have to accommodate it. So for now, we thought it would be inopportune to say, let's incorporate a bunch of flexibility and not work with the public on seeing if there's an appetite for that flexibility. Okay. So as we move on to step 2 of this, which we've already been doing through our zoning bylaw engagement, it's been a very big piece of all the coffee chat discussions, is how much flexibility do we want to embed as part of our future bylaw? But for now, it's kind of like, let's rip the Band-Aid off, let's just comply with the legislation in the least significant way, and then we can forge our own path, and then the province isn't, breathing down our neck with this June 30th timeline, and then we can move on and take more time to engage with the community to see what their appetite is for flexibility.
Thank you. All right, I'll ask one last time. Any further comment on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Someone want to do number 2, please? Councillor Cherry.
Thanks, Worship. I move that zoning amendment bylaw number 2380 be read a second and third. Sorry, be given a second and third reading.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councillor Lucien, discussion on this motion. Seeing nothing for Councillor Palmer.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Souls. Just a couple of comments. We'll try not to go on too long. The concept of don't want the public to think that it's being shoved down our throats. Well, it is. With an authoritarian approach that has not consulted with the communities, what the fabric of our community and how we self-determine what our community looks like. Many of those things are those things that we have taken for granted for decades is being ripped away. And the question about the parking is very, very significant. So all those single family properties that now can have up 3-4 dwelling places. Anybody in the community that's been concerned about spillover of visitors during snow season, there is an impact. There is an impact. We had the variance that we had earlier today that's going over onto city property. There's going to be more and more people parking on the streets because we can't put those restrictions. Who's going to be paying for the much, much more difficult snow removal processes and those kind of things? And so I think it's important for the public to understand. I think it's important for us as council to understand what the actual implications of this. And the biggest concerning thing is the muzzling of local voice. Thank you, Mayor Souls.
Thank you, Councillor Palmer. Anyone else with comment? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? No, motion's carried unanimously. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time. Moving on to item 9C, zoning amendment bylaw 2379 for Simpson Street. Mr. Simon, do you have a brief overview on that?
Through your worship, so this is a follow-up to the March 26th council meeting where council granted first, second, third reading to bylaw 2379, rezone the 411 and 501 Simpson Street from R2A to R6 to allow for 18 row houses and 18 secondary suites on the subject properties. Council granted third reading, subject to the condition that a stormwater management plan be provided as per the recommendations of the Engineering Services Department, as well as a requirement for a public information session. That public information session was held on Tuesday, May 7th. The proponent has prepared a public information meeting summary that is attached here. So all the requirements on third reading have been addressed, and now the rezoning bylaw is back before council consideration for final adoption. Consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Simon. Somebody want to put this motion on the table for me, Councilor Lucero?
I move that zoning amendment bylaw number 2379 be adopted.
Seconder for the motion, please, Councilor Devlin. Further discussion on this motion? Councilor Orlando?
Yeah, your worship, I'm not going to support the motion. I think, nothing to do at all with the applicant or the development or density at all. I think more focused on our process and how we're doing things and following on Councillor Palmer's concerns, which I hear, and I just want to say that, like, I really definitely hear what Councillor Palmer's saying about, us, in the middle of a zoning bylaw rewrite, having to adapt on the way and consume staff time and a lot of effort to get these things done. My concern often is how we do things in conjunction with that, and I don't necessarily share the same view of opposing what is proposed by the provincial government, but I think more introspection on how we go about doing this, and my concern being going from first reading to final adoption in one meeting of a bylaw that was required to support this, and so that is a concern for me. And I think without getting into the weeds of details of zoning bylaws and rules and technicalities and requirements and whatnot, I'll fall back on my favorite, one of my quotes that I think my fourth time I've used it now in a couple of years is the Maya Angelou one of people forgetting the words you use, but they don't forget how they make you feel when you do things. And I think I sense, for example, in Councillor Palmer's concerns about this lack of necessarily decision making or accountability. I can't really in this decision here have a bit of a challenge centering it in oversight here. I feel that it's drifting elsewhere, but I think we do have a procedural ability to stick with that. And my final thing I would say is, in the past I've had no concerns or issues with making unpopular decisions in front of lots of people and many community members, because I think they're the right decision. But my concern more specifically is in our processes and procedures, not giving that fair hearing, even though hearings, for example, may not be permitted under new provincial legislation, just in our intent and our processes trying to get there. So again, this is really, internal city focus, nothing to do on the outside with the applicant and the applications.
Thank you. Any other comments from council? Seeing none, I will call a question. All those in favor? Opposed? Note that Councillor Stapenhurst, Councillor Orlando are opposed. Councillor Palmer, in opposition or in favor?
Yeah, I'm in favor of it. Yeah, I resisted the temptation to go into detail. Thank you.
All right, so again, note Councillor Stapenhurst, Councillor Orlando opposed, balance of council in favor. This motion passes. Moving on to staff reports, 11A. Someone want to put the audited financial statements on the table for me, please? Councillor Devlin?
Move that the City of Revelstoke consolidated financial statements for the year ended December 31st, 2023 be approved.
Seconder for the motion, please, Councillor Lucero. Any further discussion on this motion? Councillor Orlando, do you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, Your Worship, I'm just wondering if PDO staff or sorry, it might be up to any staff, just some clarity, question regarding the MRDT funding that was flagged here. I've seen a lot of these, and we usually don't have line items separated out, so I'm just seeking some clarity on clarification from staff. I think I understand what is being mentioned there, and that we're partitioning it out year by year, so that doesn't fit with accounting practices, and therefore triggers the auditor to mention it. But I'm just seeking a bit of clarity through the chair of staff if we can understand what that means.
Mr. Weatherall, comment?
Yeah, through your worship. So with how we recognize the MRDT funding, because there's a 2-month delay in the reporting from the province for when we get the funding. Historically, we have recognized that, like, so the November funding from MRDT, we recognize that in January, and so forth throughout the year. So in 2023, there was a 1% increase in the MRDT amounts collected. So with the rates in the province. So in essence, the skew was a little bit higher than what kind of fits in the norms for their materiality or whatever. So we requested that just be put onto the summary of accumulated misstatements. Just because in essence it nets out in the end. Like we recognize it as it comes through. We recognized 2020 November and December in 2024 now for this year. With the rate being stabilized in 2024, that summary misstatement will basically be negated by the end of this year. So it's just a timing thing in essence and how it's reported. And that was just one thing that was kind of flagged in the audit process.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you.
Good. Any other comments from council? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to 11B, Councillor Staperners, do you have comments?
Yes, sir. Just prior to continuing on, I'm going to declare a conflict of interest, erring on the side of caution. I previously declared a conflict of interest on this, as I do have a family member that works for RCHS, and for sake of transparency, I'm going to declare that conflict. So, excuse me for a second.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm willing to put this forward.
Okay, before we start, do we have a presentation, Mr. Simon?
Through your worship, I do see Mr. McKay from Cola Development Services has very kindly agreed to join us today. I just want to extend my appreciation for him being here. He is currently on paternity leave, and he has been very nice to support us to see this through to the end. This is the conclusion, or what could be the conclusion, depending on council's direction, I guess, of the Housing Solutions project that was originally brought forth to you guys in 2023. So we have expedited its completion, and we are pleased to announce that we do have some options for council to consider today on how we can see Revelstoke, the city of Revelstoke, increase its involvement in the non-market housing sector to continue making sure we have enough housing for all members of this community. So council would like to see a presentation on this. Mr. McKay and his team have prepared one, and I will pass it over to him.
Okay, Mr. McKay, we'd love to see your presentation.
All right, thanks everyone. I'm Souls. Thank you, Mr. Simon. Let's get going in the interest of expediency. I know you have a long agenda today. So thank you very much for having me. My name is Sandy Mackey. I'm the Housing Research and Policy Lead here at McColl Development Services. We're a nonprofit planning, consulting, and affordable housing organization working throughout British Columbia, mostly on affordable housing projects through organizations like BC Housing and CMHC. This is the sort of concluding piece of the Revelstoke Housing Entity Study, which is part of your broader Housing Solutions project, which has been led by staff since last fall. So this piece fits as the second scope of McColl Development Services work, the feasibility study, which fits kind of throughout phases 3 to 5 of the Housing Solutions project. You probably recall, you saw me before in January of this year when we led the council workshop on January 18th. The goal of that workshop was to establish a council consensus on housing-related goals and priorities. What sort of emerged from that was a desire to further support non-market housing projects in the city of Revelstoke. The next phase then was a feasibility study to look at a number of different models where that support could be directed. So we reviewed best practices for locally supported housing models, engaged with staff and local partners, including your existing kind of non-market housing sector providers. And we've completed a final feasibility report, which is attached in your agenda. There's also a staff report that's attached in your agenda as well. Lots of detail there. I'm just going to be giving you the sort of high level pieces in this presentation, but there's plenty of detail and lots of information on the engagement and full process that we undertook to come to this recommendation. Part of this process, we put together this this really easy to understand graphic. It's actually represented very nicely within your staff report. In your housing sort of system, there are three key sort of players that all work together to provide housing in your community. There's the market sector, which is what we're all most familiar with. That's private development that provides units for folks living in Revelstoke. There's the non-market housing sector, which provides typically affordable housing units, units that are not tied to market forces for their pricing schemes. And then finally, there is the city of Revelstoke, who worked with both providers traditionally from a land use legislation and regulation perspective, but more and more frequently in a partnership method as well. So the goal for this study was to look at options for how the city of Revelstoke can continue to support the non-market sector, that sort of space between the green and the blue there. You'll probably recall that when I was in front of you in January, I put up a slide that had kind of three key roles that the city could take moving forward. The first was funder, something that you're already doing at the city level, but there are options for expanding how you support non-market housing through funding specifically. The second was the developer model, and the third was the sort of developer and operator model, or the full scope operations as part of this. We took those three kind of options and built out four distinct models based on those pieces. The fourth one kind of emerged throughout the study is something we weren't expecting to see, but emerged as an interesting option. So we've highlighted that as well. But the first three should be fairly familiar for you. I'll go through them all in some quick detail here, but it is important to know that we have vetted each of these through 8 specific criteria, all of which deal with governance and organizational structure, legal implications, financial implications, and implementation and startup implications. For a full sort of scoring of each of these models, please don't hesitate to refer to the final feasibility report. So the first, the funding model. Underneath this model, there are 2 distinct roles that the city of Revelstoke can play. One is project-oriented financial support. Typically, this is capital or land contributions to non-market housing projects. This is something you're already doing at the city. You are providing direct funding for non-market affordable housing on a project-to-project basis, typically through capital. This is something obviously that is important to continue to do. To expand your role as a funder, you can look to provide ongoing financial support. This would be providing funding support non-market affordable housing operations, in addition just to capital development and or organizational development. We, as part of this process, spoke to all of the non-market providers within your community. What emerged was that the Revelstoke Community Housing Society was the one society that showed a significant interest in expanding their operations, expanding their capacity, and their ability to provide more units. They really do want to scale up in your community to start providing more housing. An example of this kind of model in British Columbia would be in Squamish, the Squamish Community Housing Society. It is a society that is supported by an annual contribution to from the District of Squamish to the organization, and they've got a board composition similar to what the RCHS already has, a mix of community members and housing specialists who both live in Revelstoke and have a variety of pieces of expertise that relate to housing development. The second model, the developer model, in this case, the municipality would take on the role of developer through a housing authority or corporation. We looked at this one pretty heavily, as there are some good examples of how this could work in British Columbia. The Tofino Housing Corporation is the kind of most specific relevance to Revelstoke. In this case, what happens is the city kind of uses the corporation or authority model to focus on building, and then partners with a nonprofit to operate the units. Operations can be sometimes on the order of 60+ year operating agreements that you would sign with organizations like BC Housing. And even when that operating agreement expires, you're still responsible for the ongoing operations of the rental units in that building. So in this case, you would be offloading that responsibility for operations to a third party, but taking on the responsibility of building. There's a significant cost associated with this, startup costs, ongoing staffing, development and pre-development costs. There are some specific cost estimates for each of these models within the staff report in your agenda package. But at a high level estimate, we sort of estimated based on Tofino's numbers at least $250,000 in annual operations costs before even starting to invest in the development. So it's a fairly substantial contribution if you are wanting to go with the developer model. The third model, acting as both a developer and an operator. In this case, the municipality takes on the role, the dual role developer and operator with an operations portfolio to manage these units in perpetuity. This, as you can imagine, is the most significant investment that the community could make in affordable housing. Operations funding, operations staff, development funding, development staff. This is a large skill set that you need to acquire and integrate within a new organization. And before units can begin generating income or a revenue to self-support the organization, you need to have a critical mass of affordable housing units. And a big risk of this project is that you would be duplicating resources that already exist within your community, and that with less investment, you could be building up those resources rather than trying to duplicate them or create something new. Examples of this in BC, because there are some, the city of Burnaby has recently invested a huge amount of money, upwards of, I think, $10 million in their housing corporation, which they expect to both operate and develop new units. And the Whistler Housing Authority is kind of the one people point to, though it's not a new organization. It's relatively long-standing, so it has a chance to build up that critical mass of units over time. The fourth option, which is something that's a bit of a outside the box approach, but I think is feasible in the longer term, would be to look at a regional approach to affordable housing. There is the opportunity to implement a CSRD-led housing entity aimed at increasing the stock of non-market housing across the entire CSRD, so both municipalities and electoral areas. Typically, these would be funded through a regional housing service bylaw, which is a mechanism through which the regional district establishes housing as a regional service, and then taxes for that service and distributes the cash to deliver that service. It is really useful in that there is a recognition here that municipalities and service hubs often bear a greater burden in terms of delivering housing than rural communities, but that those rural communities often see much value from municipalities who are having more affordable housing. So it is a way of kind of distributing the cost associated with developing more units. However, it would not be Revelstoke specific, and it would not be Revelstoke owned. So it would be something that would need to serve the entire CSRD equally, and Revelstoke would just be a portion of that portfolio. There are a lot of great examples of this here in Victoria. The Capital Regional Housing Corporation is a longstanding example of this. I see it every year on our property tax. There's a line item for the Capital Regional Housing Corporation. Similarly, on the Vancouver Island, the Cowichan Housing Society also exists, and a couple of other regional districts have gone down the path of doing this type of development. The funding can be distributed in a fairly flexible manner, which is another interesting portion of this piece. So those are the four models. Through engagement, we took all four of these models to your local housing providers. It really did emerge that the first model, the funder model, was the most appropriate and applicable to your community, and that we heard pretty loudly that the Revelstoke Community Housing Society would be very, very interested in scaling up its operations. They want to take on additional capacity. They want to build up their portfolio and develop new units within the city of Revelstoke. And I think they're a pretty vital partner to continue to do this work. So the project team is recommending that the city of Revelstoke formalize its relationship with the RCHS and explore ongoing funding operations to build administrative, operations, property management, staff, and board capacity. The goal of the funding should be to scale up the society so it can take on larger development projects. And in exchange for funding, the society would need to provide a business plan that can demonstrate the potential to be self-sustaining within a predetermined period. Our estimate would be kind of in a 5-year cycle. And then they would also need to report regularly to council on progress towards that self-sustainability and towards their housing goals. The business plan, we've included this in the feasibility report, should include at least the following items, but it could include more. A description of services, a management plan, staffing structure, market analysis, marketing plan, operations plan, risk analysis, implementation plan, and an operating budget. So it would not be a token document. That we're suggesting a fairly robust document to justify the funding for the RCHS. And as well, that relationship should be formalized through a policy, bylaw, or partnership agreement. And I believe in the staff report, Mr. Simon has made a more specific recommendation for the type of legal or policy mechanism that should be pulled in order to make this a reality and to formalize this commitment through a council resolution. So just as a kind of high level overview, expanding your role as funder, the role of society would then be to develop and operate new units within your community. A policy, bylaw, or partnership agreement would be the financial mechanism through which that cash is transferred. The commitment would be determined with the submission of the RCHS business plan. And that business plan should demonstrate the potential to be self-sustaining within 3 to 5 years. The proposed governance structure would be a board comprised of representatives from the city and community members with relevant experience in non-market housing, social services, real estate development, and construction. And a proposed staffing model, this is just an early estimate, would be an executive director, a manager of housing operations, and a manager of society operations. And I think we can probably leave it there. I appreciate that you all might have questions, so I'm happy to spend some time answering any questions that you have. And I will also invite Mr. Simon to jump in if there's anything that I missed. If there's anything critical that I forgot to include in that presentation.
Great, thank you, Mr. Mackey. Mr. Simon, any comments or anything you'd like to state at this point?
Through your worship, nothing to add on, just really pleased to be able to bring this to council to really start solidifying and formalizing what our role in the non-market housing sector is going to be. And the whole intent is to see more non-market housing built in Revelstoke over the coming years.
Great, thank you for that. Councillor Landa, do you want to put this motion on the table?
Your worship, absolutely. However, I just wanted to ask a question of the chair. Since the resolution recommends working with Revelstoke Community Housing Society, I'm a board member of RCHS and council rep over there. I do note that the co-chair of the Revelstoke Community Housing Society, Sheena Wells, as well as the general manager of the Revelstoke Community Housing Society, Mr. Taha Atia, are in attendance today. So my question of the chair prior to reading out the resolutions is, could we entertain having the leadership from RCHS provide feedback or answer questions, or however is most appropriate, and where would that happen within this process with this agenda item today?
I'm okay with that. Why don't we do that now? So before we go, so first thing, your council rep on RCHS, are you a voting board member in addition to that?
I am the council representative on Revelstoke Community Housing Society. I am a voting board member of Revelstoke Community Housing Society. Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to ask another councillor to put that on the table so there's no conflict. Is that okay with you, Ms. Floyd? Okay, or no perceived conflict, councillor? But I would like you to have comment.
Yes. Yeah, just sort of in the point of order thing, institutional knowledge of being on council going back to 2017. We went through 2016. We went through this specific question specifically with my membership of Revelstoke Community Housing Society as that dual role, that split allegiance, which is a question of conflict. And at that time, the professional advice of staff after consulting professionals is that it was not in a conflict position. Having said that, I'm happy to have another councillor bring the resolution forward if that is more comfortable for perception. But it was quite a big issue at the time, and we did resolve it. And from that point forward, there was deemed to be no conflict position, as this is a council appointment.
Yeah, and had you said you were just a representative in your eyes of years of council, but you said you're a voting member. And so I look at that and just for clarity and so that we don't have issues, I prefer another counselor to bring it forward. I'm not disputing what you're saying. I don't want there to be any problems. So,
Your worship, yeah, I understand that, but just to be clear, my position is, and I'm happy to have another councillor bring this forward, is that we have been through this process and this issue has been resolved. And specifically this case, this issue, exact same circumstances resolved in the past. So.
great. And so, Ms. Wells, Mr. Tia, do you have any comments or would like to come to the podium to embellish some of the stuff that we've all heard?
Vote option 1. No, just kidding. No, but really, I think I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody has any. But I would say that the process was very involved in the time that we put into meetings with Macola and with Paul. Lots of input given on all options, lots of questions asked, lots of lessons learned from the Housing Society as well through the process. So we really appreciated the work that Macola did and the approach that they took. And so I think that their recommendations would certainly endorse what we put into our feedback. The report certainly reflects that. So yeah, we just got back from Salmon. We toured all of the CMHA housing developments there and spent the day with Dawn, who's the executive director of housing in Salmon Arm, and they've got 400 units, and we did how they got their day with senior staff or with the Housing Society staff and myself. So this certainly is exciting to have this sort of at the end of the day, and here to answer any questions if you guys have any.
So 400 units in how many years?
20-ish years. The mid-90s is when they sort of recognized that in Salmon Arm there weren't any housing providers taking action as like a non-market approach. So they were mental health focused as an agency, or federally, that's what they do. So they started with a mental health lens and grew those units. They just finished, a really big build, 100 and something units. But yeah.
So if we put the pressure on, we give you 5 years to get that done, you can do it.
Well, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
You heard it here.
Yeah, totally.
Councillor Orlando.
Your worship, through the chair, a question to Ms. Wells. So in terms of this, putting pressure on our CHS to develop a business plan, get to self-sufficiency, what is sort of the prognosis for, or the outlook for you in being able to do that? I know, for example, we've increased our resource level dramatically in the past few years, including staffing resources and contracted resources. Are you confident that our CHS can achieve that, and in how long? What do you think the time frame is?
Yeah, so we had our strategic plan was sort of coming to the end of an 18-month, 2-year strategic plan, in which the priority goal was to have the capacity and the administrative sort of functions to be able to scale up. So to be able to respond to RFPs that were big, like the Downey Street RFP. And so having met all of those strategic goals, the next perfectly aligned step is a new strategic plan, a new business plan, structurally having a consultant or a group work with us to take us through that work alongside our community partner, which is the City of Revelstoke. So in order for us to be successful in this, we need this partnership. So we've been kind of coming alongside through this to understand what would be our best next step. So I'm confident that we can do that within the 3 to 5 years in terms of the business plan development. We've already, in the fall, we put forward a request that had a budget in it, that had a 3 to 5 year business sort of budget, operational budget in there, showing that how we would get from where we are now into sustained operations ourselves. And so we're familiar with that work. We know what we need to have in place to get there, to operate what sort of number of units. And we know what the OCP and the Housing Action Plan say in terms of how many units the community needs and how big of a growth and over what kind of time. So we know exactly what our target is, what our lane is and who our partners are. City of Revelstoke, BC Housing. So yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Paula?
Your worship, I have another question for the chair. Thank you so much for the opportunity. in the report that Macola did, and I know you worked closely with Macola, and we had an opportunity to, I had an opportunity to sit in a meeting recently. It was great to see the collaboration there through the city process. My question is this: the report lays out a bunch of several different models, sort of the quasi SWOT analysis of what works, what's the good, the bad, the ugly of the various models, and how we would work it in terms of RCHS's perspective on which one of those models is best, or which is the best one to build upon. What are your thoughts on what you think is sort of the best model working forward?
Option one.
Mhm.
And so we did honestly.
Sorry, I mean different communities like the Squamish.
Yeah, so Squamish would be the closest from what we understood. There are some differences in that Squamish is starting from scratch and sort of building things up. So we have an existing board, we have an existing structure, and we have an existing and historical tie with the city.
Yeah.
So because it used to be a city entity and is now has city representation from city council, there's that formalized partnership on our end in terms of our bylaws and those director appointments, the board members. We represent all of that, the list that was noted there in terms of governance. I think the other piece, like through this process, that the other communities or other entities in the province are looking to us and getting feedback from us on is our relationship with the city. It's being seen and celebrated as a huge success. And so I think the formalizing of that piece, and so that bylaw or policy or however that looks, to say, you know, what's working really well and what's going to make sure that this is successful, both from the city side, but also from the society, is that relationship. So how do we formalize that? How do we and where does that get formalized? Because it's not just the funding. Without a functional relationship and communication and a collaborative process, funding really isn't all that helpful, because we also need land and we need servicing and we have to be able to talk about pipes and we have to talk about capital investments and other funders, other lenders, other partners at the table. But the city relationship with RCHS is sort of the key piece that we have and we're doing really well, that we'd love to be able to formalize and then also share that back to those other communities. So Squamish is the most closely aligned with the approach that we're recommending we take, but we also are sort of a leg up in that place. So thanks to the city for that too.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Wells. Any other comments from other councillors? Seeing none, Councillor Orlando, staff have confirmed you are correct, so I'm going to ask you to put this motion on the table.
Oh, Your Worship, thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Wells, and for the presentation. That was amazing. So I move that the nonprofit housing developer and operator model option number 1 be endorsed in principle as detailed in the staff report dated May 14th, 2024, subject to the following next steps. And I see this as wording as one, so would the preference be to go through all three? Sure. Yes. Number 1, the Revelstoke Community Housing Society provides a business plan detailing a strategy to scale their operations and the amount of financial support and duration of financial support that is requested from the city by no later than August 31st, 2024. 2, upon receipt of a business plan, city staff review and bring forward for council consideration as part of budget deliberations for 2025, and as part of discussions on budget deliberations for 2025, council considers the funding request made by the Revelstoke Community Housing Society and prioritize against all budget requests to ensure the city is considering the impacts on the big picture prior to approval.
Seconder for the motion, please, Councillor Lusal. Any further discussion on the motion? Councillor Charlie.
Thanks, Your Worship. I just want to make sure that we're all going to be able to make these timelines. Were these, is that doable?
I just looked at Don. Keep Sandy on the line. Yeah. Yes, it's doable.
Okay, just make sure that there is, that it does work out.
Mr. Sun.
And through Your Worship, just if it adds any, I guess, comfort to the process, staff have spoke with RCHS about this. We have spoke with Macola Development Services to see if there's some ability for support. And the goal here is that we have something by August 31st so that it can be vetted by staff, you know, the CAO, our corporate officer, our director of finance, planning, engineering, and that we can bring something forward that everyone as a city is in support of, that our CHS is in support of, that we can do all this in time for the 2025 budget deliberations. That is really key. And as the budget deliberations keep backing up, we want to make sure that there's some time for a little bit of back and forth so that we can get that business plan in final form so that it's something that can be supportable.
Awesome.
Follow-up?
No, Your Worship, this is great news for the whole community.
Councillor London.
Your worship, yes, and to that end, yeah, I just wanted to say, and I believe that Ms. Wells may have said this, but just to reiterate, the RCHS board's plan is to create a new strategic plan and business plan over the summer for that August 31st deadline. And yeah, thanks again to Mr. Simon for all that they have done, including substantial infrastructure work, consultation for our lands adjacent to the planning process that council's approved for the lands near Bridge Creek, and so many other work for here. It is a lot of work, but we have upped our resources, including the real key thing has been able to hire the staff who can then administer the contracts for other contracted professional staff. So that's really the linchpin. If it's just on volunteers, then that's real hard. But once you get people in place who can oversee contracts and other things, you manage to get your resources up there. But definitely the funding support is going to be the next key thing, and that's what's outlined in this plan, is that all this work we're doing to meet the goals that our ambitious goals do require the city support. And I think the plan here, the proposal here outlines the best way. And just before I go, and I just want to make one quick comment, I do want to thank co-chair Mike Brooks-Hill, who is co-chair with Ms. Sheena Wells, our treasurer, this is the board members, our treasurer Karen Ball, who has more homework for financial document homework for me tonight, for our meeting tomorrow, and directors Peter Bernacki, Pam Doyle, director and past chair Randy Dreddiger, director and secretary Jane McNabb, director Rana Nelson, and also director Tara Sutherland. These community volunteers have been putting in so much work on a lot of really great stuff that is on housing that is poised to come to fruition soon, and I'm just really thrilled to work with that team. It's a great environment, a lot of hard work, and I just think hats off. My request is if you see one of those people in the street, anyone listening in or anyone in the room, please thank them for their service, because it's been tremendous so far.
Good, thanks for your comments. Any other comments from council? Seeing none, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Motion's carried unanimously. Thank you all, and thank you, Mr. Mackey, for all of your work. Appreciate that. Mr. Simon and your team, and of course to RCHS in what they've done. So, Mr. Gibbs, could you let our councillor back in, please? Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
Take, if there's anyone else that needs to take a 2-minute break, bio break, that's good fun.
Sure, why not?
We are still live.
Okay, Ms. Belisel, can you just let the public know that we'll just take a brief break to use the facilities?
Certainly.
Thank you.
Oh, thanks.
First of all. Ms. Delaselle, we're ready to go again.
Certainly, one moment.
Thank you. Item 11C, Mr. Simon, do you have a brief overview?
Yes, certainly, through your worship. So this is an application for a development permit amendment at 2955 Camosy Road. So this is for the hotel that is currently under construction. The proponent has submitted a amendment application to the development permit. The nature of the amendment is noted within the staff report, but there's essentially 4 changes that are requested. Some changes to the forming character of the building. The figures in the staff report as well as the attachments do show what these changes are. A lot of it has to do with kind of upgrading some of the materials on the outside. So stone cladding on a portion as opposed to blue hardy plank, and looking at vertical engineered wood siding as opposed to light mist hardy plank, and the addition of flat lock metal shingle siding. There's been changes to the west elevation of the building. So that would be the portion that is abutting properties within the Thomas Brook community, to include a patio design. So this was originally presented to council in 2022. The development permit amendment was rejected by council at that time. Changes have been made at that time, or from that time, to reduce the footprint of the patio, install glass railings and canopy over to reduce noise impacts. The maximum seating capacity on the patio would be 40 people, and it's been designed to be more narrow, so it only spans about 2.75 meters from the actual wall to the edge of the patio. We did update the permit conditions because there were conditions on the permit that restricted any openings and any window openings on the west side of the building. So we have recommended that that permit condition be removed on the development permit that is in the draft package for council. There's the Skybridge connection from the hotel to the Sutton Place over Camosy Road. So again, some minor changes to the forming character of that, making it more in line with the forming character changes for the building itself. And then again, pretty minor, but minor changes to the helipad area to include an elevated concrete pad and a landscape buffer. So that's the nature of the changes. The amendment has been reviewed against the applicable development permit area guidelines as contained in the official community plan and zoning bylaw. And in staff's evaluation, it does comply with those guidelines. And as such, we do recommend issuance of the permit, and happy to answer any questions that council may have. Thank you.
Before I get the motion put on the table, does anyone have any questions of Mr. Simon? Okay, Councillor Devlin and Councillor Wendell.
Through the chair to staff, can you give me a little bit of context as per, this has kind of been glossed over, and I'm sure you know we've received an email from a concerned neighbor, so I won't pretend that we haven't. I'm just looking for a little bit of context on, it's kind of a 1-sentence staff note that the permit conditions need to be updated to allow open windows on the west facade. So can you kind of explain more about that? Like, why are open windows on the west facade currently not allowed? What was the background to that? Can you give me a little bit more information on that?
Through your worship to Councillor Devlin, I will do my best. This was a condition that was placed on the permit before my time here. My understanding, it was placed at that time to kind of appease some of the concerns with respect to noise that were brought up. I would note for council, whenever we have development permits that are coming forward, the legislation and the legal precedent is really, really clear. We have to evaluate them against the applicable development permit area guidelines, and any conditions we impose have to be related to those development permit area guidelines. We can't just put anything that we wish on there. So I would say, in my professional opinion, having that condition on there does pose a bit of a risk because it's not directly related to those forming character development permit area guidelines. So it does go a bit above and beyond what our authority may be when it comes to issuing development permits. So I think it's a good thing that we do consider removal of it. But also, again, the only rationale that I have as to why it was put on there was what was noted in the staff report, was to mitigate any noise impacts on the adjacent property. And that's the best I can deduce from the evaluation at the time back in 2018, 2019.
Okay, thank you.
And I can confirm that. I'm sitting at this table at that time. Councillor Staples, did you have a question?
I did have a question, just to follow up. Thank you through the chair to Mr. Simon. You kind of alluded to some risk. So my question to you is, have you sought out legal opinion as to whether or not that development permit was issued in accordance with the authority that the city has to issue that permit. Because I think based on my interpretation, based on my limited knowledge about the situation, is that it was kind of a key criteria that those western facing windows were not able to open. And my understanding was that there was no patio to be allowed on that western side. So yeah, that's my question. Is like, have we, like, are we within our rights to deny those previously? And where do we stand right now in regards to it? And because you mentioned the legal risk, or kind of insinuated something to the extent.
Through your worship, Councillor Stabenour, so planning staff deal with this kind of day in, day out, right? We review legal precedent very frequently. We work with legal. We haven't engaged them specifically on this matter because it's not something where we've been specifically challenged on it yet. If we were challenged on it, then of course we would engage legal to make sure that it is a lawful condition that was applied. I guess this would be a more risk-adverse approach to not have that condition on there, because I don't see any really applicable development permit area guidelines that would form the basis for that condition to be imposed. It's a very unique situation. I've never seen a condition like that on a development permit that's been issued by the city, especially within an area where, when we look at our official community plan, this property where the hotel is on is designated resort in our official community plan land use strategy. The property adjacent to it in the whole Thomas Brook area, at the request of the Thomas Brook area residents, is designated resort area fringe. So we have to understand that there's going to be some resort style development on the resort lands that does come along with these type of implications, as well as there's going to be some resort fringe style development on the Thomas Brook lands that will be complementary to the resort operations. So I don't really see, I guess, value in having that condition on there, especially given the fact that to the north of the Heli Hotel structure itself, there is 3 helipads that are there that would generate significantly more noise than anyone with an open window or a very small patio.
Does that answer your question?
Not, I mean, to a degree, I feel like we're kind of skirting around the issue and glossing it over. I mean, so previously the development permit was issued with no windows and no patio. Is that correct?
Through your worship, it's no patio, but it was windows that were
or windows
that were restricted from opening. Yes.
Okay, and that was a key criteria of that development permit being issued. And now we're looking to rescind that. And based on the amendment to the development permit, we don't have to go back out to the public and consult with the general 100-meter vicinity of the applicant. Is that correct?
Through your worship to Councillor Stabenour, your worship would probably be able to say whether or not it was a key criteria in determining the development permit decision at the time, because again, I wasn't here during that time, so I can't say. But there is no legislative requirement for a development permit. They are non-discretionary. So there's no legislative requirement for public involvement in the process. It's not a land use change. It is a permit that is applied for, where if it complies with the development permit area guidelines, the city must issue the permit. They are non-discretionary. It's not like a land use change, like a rezoning, where council can say they want to change from residential to commercial. We don't want to support that land use change. If a development permit complies with applicable development permit area guidelines as contained within our OCP, you must issue the development permit. And there is really long-standing legal precedent of councils across BC refusing to issue development permits only to have that decision overturned by the courts because the development permit complied with the applicable guidelines.
Okay, Councillor Orlando had his hand up earlier and I neglected to go to him before Councillor Stabenour. Councillor Orlando, do you want to speak at this time?
No, your worship, not at this moment. I'm just.
Okay, Councillor Chair.
Thanks, Your Worship. I was looking for clarity on how these were, specifically the windows and the no patio were put on there, if that was a non-discretionary at the time. How did that sneak its way on after having, clearly an email from a concerned neighbor?
So I'll weigh in
Sure.
on that because I sat here in this chair at that time. Council was concerned about the noise permeating that resident's home. And so said, well, can we add the fact that we don't want windows that open so there's no noise, and let's not have a patio. And so I believe it was barely passed. I'm not sure of that sort of thing. And we look at it now where things have changed. We now have the golf course, so we know that we've got, I think, the 18th hole right next door to that home, and those helipads.
If I can, your worship, so then was it just an oversight of staff to allow those restrictions to be in
That
place
I
on
can't
that?
speak to as to whether it was an oversight or not, or it was just a request of members of council. So my apologies.
Yeah, no, it's, I'm just gonna take a moment for my words.
Sure.
Anybody else wants to comment?
Anyone else? Councilor Staken.
I think overall what my concern is, and I echoed this in regards to one of this at the special committee, seems like it was last week, could have been. Where we're going out with our communication and with our engagement with the community, and council has already ruled on this. I feel that it's kind of back in front of us again today, hopefully, negating the need for public input and trying to skirt public involvement. I really worry about the engagement and the communication with the overall public, and I worry that we're kind of finding loopholes and other ways of accomplishing the same results that was ultimately wanted a couple of years ago. So I'm not sure I'm going to be in favor of this one. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for your comment. Any further comments, Councilor Orlando?
Your worship, I have a question of staff just on the technical side. So, when this development permit was first approved, this had a process. I realize there's changes of how processes are working now due to provincial government changes, but there was a process associated with it, including notification and community involvement. In terms of the development permit amendment, what is required in this case here in terms of, so for example, reconsulting with those who were involved the first time around about changes such as those proposed?
Mr. Sun.
Through your worship, Councilor Orlando. So I just want to clarify, even when the development permit was originally considered in 2019, there's no legislative requirement for public involvement with a development permit. Development permits are non-discretionary. If they comply with the guidelines, we must issue them. It is not something that we can say, yes, no, maybe. It is, if it complies, we must issue it. They are non-discretionary permits. And that is why there is no public involvement process in a development permit. So it's similar to a building permit. The building permit complies with our zoning bylaw, we must issue it unless the building inspector has, major concerns from a code compliance perspective. So development permits are similar. When the amendment came forward, there was, I think at the time, going back to 2022 now, I think staff did give a heads up to the individual that expressed some opposition originally, and they did, submit another letter saying that they are still opposed to it. And this time around, we did not reach out to them because, again, it's a non-discretionary permit and there is no formal requirement for public notification. But we did note in the report that there was opposition that was provided, and we did link to that report. And the owner did submit another letter for council that is on the agenda today.
Yes. Okay. All right, any other comments from council?
Your worship, just for clarification, so through the chair, we don't have the ability to deny this or change it at all at this moment?
Through your worship to Councillor Cherry, council, generally speaking, with development permits, you don't deny them, you defer a decision on them, and you direct the changes that need to occur to align with the development permit area guidelines. So if our development permit area guidelines say you must use wood and stone in your building, and they're proposing no wood or stone, council could say defer a decision on it, direct the applicant to amend their proposal to incorporate wood and stone as per development permit area guideline X, Y, and Z. So there are development permits that do get rejected and they do get denied, but it's a very slippery slope when you look at the legal precedent. You're not going to see something in the legislation that says you cannot refuse a development permit, but when you look at the established precedent that has been provided in BC, if it complies with the development permit area guidelines, a court will require that council and the city issue a development permit. So if council wants to see changes to it, then the direction would be to defer a decision and direct those changes and reference the applicable development permit area guideline that would warrant those changes.
All right, thank you for that comment. So I'm going to make comment because I've sat at this table twice before dealing with this. This permit comes forward. I love this, what they're doing to the building as far as the changes go, the overhead stuff. I love the fact that with the patio they are proposing is quite a bit smaller than the original patio. The fact that there's lots of helicopters operating in the area. So we've got Whitworth, that's just around the corner from the resort. We've got Bison Lodge, and we've got one or two other lodges that are landing helicopters on a regular basis, as well as 3 helipads here on this. And the fact that the resort has the golf course in that area. It's resort fringe. We're going to see some sort of noise as well. And I'm supportive of the changes and feel that it's appropriate for moving this project forward. So, and that's taking into consideration of the concern of this resident as well. So I'll ask one last time. Councillor Lucien, you have comment?
Thank you, Marshals. Yeah, so we've seen the comments from the neighbors around this. When it comes to the noise issue, I do agree that the helicopters are going to create noise. My thought is when it comes to privacy of the neighbors below, that maybe a glass railing could be changed to maybe offer a little bit more privacy to the property owner directly below.
Okay. Any other comments from Councillor Dublin?
Through the chair, yeah, I'm just gonna make a general comment here. My issue with this is less the noise. I don't generally consider, how do I phrase this? I don't generally consider small inconveniences in the wake of development. These are personal things. People get bothered by noise, or they get bothered by parking in front of their house. They get bothered by a lot of things. And I'm not saying those are invalid, but that's not really the bothering of one person or 2 people or 3 people is not really in the scope of council to consider the individual. It's to consider the process and the overall picture, as at least as I see it. I'm not speaking for everyone here, but that's the way I've always kind of approached this. My issue with this is that I'm missing a lot of information about the original development permit. For example, I have 2 links here in the report, neither of which works. I have a report from October 11, 2022 that I can't access. I have the original report from January 22nd, 2019, a link that I can't access. They both come up bad links for me. I'm assuming for everybody else. They work for you? Because they certainly don't for me. So, yeah, I'm just getting bad request invalid URL. So my issue is more, I do certainly hear what the planning staff is saying, and I respect their expertise, but also what I'm hearing kind of behind what they're saying is that Director Simon just doesn't know if that was a valid condition on the original condition or not. He wasn't here, he didn't get the reports, he's looking at it now in the lens of today and being like, I don't really see how it was, but we're being, again, all I have to go on is an email from a neighbor being told there was a noise assessment survey, that it is very specific in the language, that was part of the design of the hotel. And I don't know enough about the legalities of that. If that was never a valid condition of a development permit, then it should be lifted. I certainly agree with that, but I don't know if it was or not. So what I am willing, there's no motion on the table yet, so I think that would have to go in first, but I'd be willing to make a motion to defer this until we get a opinion from legal, if that was in any way valid in the first, because that would probably color my decision on this. I'm not attempting to hamper, in general, the resort having amenities for their guests. I understand why they want them and why that's good business on their end, and I'm more than willing to consider that, but not what this looks like to me from the very limited information that I can access with the links I have is it was a condition that was put on, and then the attempt to get the condition lifted, and again, that is not any fault of the developer here. And then that attempt was denied, and now there is another attempt to get that lifted. And that process of it kind of doesn't sit very well with me. So I would like to know how important or how much of a consideration on the original development permit, and whether or not that was a valid consideration on the original development permit. And I think if I had that answer, then I would have a good decision to make. But right now, I don't have that information. And in the interest of not droning on too long, yeah, that would be, once this is on the table, I'd be willing to make a motion to defer this until
I prefer, in my opinion, I prefer not to defer the whole thing because of course there is amendments to the exterior of the building. They're in the middle of construction. It would be nice to see that go. If your concern is dealing with the windows and I'll ask staff for how we deal with that. I'm gonna just shut up and go to staff right now because they know the direction I'm going in.
Through your worship, just a couple of things I do want to note. So yeah, if the links weren't working, because there was a link to the original report, and the original report and others consulted from 2019 does show that kind of the developer took it at their own prerogative, because as they were going through the process, and it states in the report, development permits are not required for public notification or public consultation, but it was kind of the prerogative of the developer to go do it at that time. But they did provide a noise impact assessment that's still appended to the permit. There's still a condition in the permit 4.16 in accordance with the noise impact assessment attached to Schedule G, and no changes here. Continuous noise level shall not exceed 45 decibels measured from the neighboring property. So that condition is still imposed on there. And then Mr. Gibbs also has reminded me, because we're very fortunate to have him here as our very experienced chief building official. I guess another reason aside from development permit conditions needing to be related to development permit area guidelines, why that condition would pose challenges for us.
Yeah, so if a condition such as this was to try to be proposed on an application currently, this is something that I would again try to speak to advise council. Ultimately, the province enacted legislation called the Building Act that was put into place, I believe, around 2017, 2018. And essentially that dictates what authorities local governments have, building officials have when it comes to regulating matters that are already regulated by the BC Building Code. So development permits are obviously permitted under the community charter. It does allow, there is legal opinions that do say that development permits and form and character guidelines are still allowed to be regulated. However, something that is a matter that is already regulated through building codes, such as openable windows, the requirement for egress, the maximum amount that windows are allowed to open, that is not something that, from what I understand and my interpretation of the legal language, is permitted to be governed by the municipality. It is left at the discretion of the minister through the BC Building Codes. So because that matter is regulated by the BC Building Code, I don't believe that condition of the non-openable windows is a valid condition that would be allowed to impose.
Okay. That answered part of your question.
In a way, it's kind of opens another sort of question that if the developer put that condition on themselves, then is it like our development? I appreciate the development permits aren't discretionary. Are development permit amendments discretionary?
Through your worship, Councillor Devlin, a development permit amendment is going to be treated the same way in the courts as a new development permit application. So if council does not want to approve a development permit amendment, again, we have to understand why it doesn't comply with the applicable development permit area guidelines, what changes would need to be made to comply with said development permit area guidelines.
Okay. And because this is on resort lands and it's approved by the provincial government in their way based on the building codes, are correct?
Through your worship, so we do have applicable development permit area guidelines. They are kind of spread between our zoning bylaw and our official community plan. One of the actions we have within our official community plan is to work with the resort to get this approval framework and setting development permit area guidelines, etc., revisited. So we have them right now. They are kind of taken a little bit, I guess, from the provincial agreement, but they're not really necessarily related.
Okay. All right. Councillor Leonard, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, your worship. Yeah, just a question, and I know it's sort of been asked, but maybe if I could just ask one more time from my understanding as I get up to speed here. So if these requirements such as not having windows that don't open that are regulated under the building permit are not permitted under a development permit under local municipal requirements, then why were they permitted in the first place? And I don't have the benefit of being on council at the time. This was before council in 2019. And last question, sorry, the important one is not just the opening windows. What list of things is the list of variants or not variances? Sorry, is the list of sorry, left the document already. Amendments, I should say. Are they all consistent with things that are not, as staff has advised, permitted to be regulated by the municipality that fall under the building permit, or is there a mix of some new changes and things that are not required?
Is that clear?
Through your worship to Councillor Orlando, I'll do my best. So if this development permit was brand new today and council said we want to impose a condition that says you cannot open up the windows, I would be advising council that there's no development permit area guideline for the resort DPA guidelines that would give us the authority to impose that condition. Mr. Gibbs would be advising you that it is potentially stepping on the toes of the Building Act, which already regulates window openings. So that's the best I can say for, the history as to why that condition was put on there. But I would also note, if we just take kind of a step back, what is the condition trying to accomplish? It's trying to accomplish mitigating noise that could happen as a result of this development. And I would note again, when council looks at point 4.16 and the conditions on the permit, a noise impact assessment was provided for this development back in 2019, and the conditions in the development permit reference that noise impact assessment. It's attached as a schedule. They are not able to exceed 45 decibels as per that noise impact assessment. So there already is a condition on there to mitigate that impact, but it's the specificity of the condition that said you can't open up windows. That's where it's really starting to, in my opinion, verge on territory that may be considered unlawful or something that does not give us the authority as per our current DPA guidelines.
Okay, thanks for that. Councillor Staples.
Help me better understand this. Through the chair to Mr. Simon, was at one point in time though this application completely prohibited from having an outdoor patio?
Through your worship to Councillor Stapeners, the outdoor patio was not on the original approved permit by council.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you say, if I may through the chair, indeed, there was no patio ever planned for outside. So the patio and the windows are kind of two separate issues. The windows, opening, fire code, I understand all that. The noise from the outside patio is a separate issue. And that, how do we govern the amount of noise? Like if previously the council was presented an issue and said, hey, listen, maybe having all the windows closed is going to mitigate the noise issue for the neighbors. Okay, that makes sense. And now we're saying we can't really regulate windows not opening, and I get that, but the patio is kind of a separate issue. So I think kind of, I think we're getting sidetracked into like the windows, and I understand that now. I think maybe we can focus on the patio, and I don't see any reason why we should be making an amendment to allow the patio. To me, there's nothing that I've heard from a planning perspective that says we need to comply with a patio. Like, yes, there's helicopters, yes, there's a golf course and whatever, but ultimately we're kind of, we've got this hotel that's right on the cusp of a residential neighborhood. And yes, it might be resort fringe. Regardless, people have backyards that are adjacent to where this patio is going to be. The line of sight is directly in line with their property, and the loss of privacy is something that I don't think we can just kind of sweep under the rug and say, well, it's a resort.
Mr. Black, you had your hand up?
I did, Your Worship, and I just wanted to put some context to the 45 decibels at property line. That's equivalent to a light rain at 40, and 50 is a quiet office or refrigerator. So I just wanted to put that out there that, you know, these are the things that we're focusing on.
Yeah.
Through your worship, important context for council too, and it was noted in the original amendment report. The patio is about 32 meters away from the most immediately adjacent house. And it's about 13.9 meters away, I believe, from the property line. So you're about 100 feet away from the patio to the actual house, and then about 40 feet away from the patio to its respective property line. So there are pretty significant setbacks. And you know, that's a setback that's greater than what we would have in the downtown area, where if a building with a restaurant that has a patio is adjacent to a residentially zoned property, that's a bigger setback than we would require for their patios. Just to, again, kind of provide that context of, you know, how close the proximity of the patio is to the subject property.
Yeah. Ms. Bowen, I'm not going to get you to speak. We've got your letter, and it's not a public hearing, so thank you.
If I may, so if we're, you know, maybe the question to ask then is, you know, if line of sights and all of these things are an issue, then is the developer willing to go back into the area that separates the patio, like separates kind of the line of sight, and look at maybe enhancing some of the landscaping, planting some more natural vegetation that will, with growth over time, help kind of create more privacy between the two?
Through your worship to Councillor Stapeners, I believe at the rear of the property, it's already pretty heavily landscaped. I think it's a riparian area back there, so they had to stay a certain, I think at least 10 to 15 meters away from it, from the streamside protection enhancement area. If I'm remembering the original development permit correctly. And if council wants to direct some changes, again, you're gonna have to work with staff as best as we possibly can. We need to understand what changes and kind of what development permit area guideline those changes are requested under.
Okay. Any comments from council regarding change that you would like, Mr. Simon, before I ask for a motion to be put on the table?
Through your worship, I am searching through the zoning bylaw right now to see if there is an applicable development permit area guideline that could help council, you know, provide some direction for the proponent. And the closest one I've been able to find so far is under general site planning, or it just says site planning should provide for adequate separation between uses to mitigate or eliminate potential conflict issues. Mitigation may include orientation of buildings or building features such as entrances, window locations, setbacks, screening, limiting operation hours, design features such as window glazing or soundproofing, or shielding of lighting to provide for privacy and reduction of noise and glare. So like that's the closest one I've been able to find that's contained within the zoning bylaw right now. So I'm trying to find a guideline that is relevant towards the nature of the conversation here.
So Mr. Simon, when I'm looking at the drawings, and I know these renditions are just renditions, but I look at landscaping, there's landscaping. So we're on what, the second or third story with this patio. And when I say second or third story, because there is a garage, a parking structure underneath, and it appears that it's on the kind of on the first floor, but it's more over to the north side of the building. Am I correct on that when I look at the drawings? And I know you're giving me distances and whatnot from the home. But.
Through your worship, yes, you are correct. It is a little bit oriented to the north side of that building. That is the two-story portion of the building.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Any other comments from council? Councilor Orlando, then Councilor Dillon.
Yeah, just your worship, just by way of feedback. I think you know, I would find it challenging to provide comments on here, just because it's challenging to sort of do a sort of tracked changes version of this. Is a little bit harder to see. Like, so you see an amended bylaw versus the original one, and again, not having the benefit of being around the first time it was approved. I think it's, you know, quite a lot in that, you know, there's a lot of details, and I think From my point, I would need quite a bit of, a little bit more time to, sift through these ones and compare what was previously permitted, what is different here, because there may be, things that I don't know about. And I guess by way of comment, it is challenging. We have a huge agenda today. There's a lot to catch up with, a lot of communications. I think this is notes here. This was a late item, but I think it was on before the weekend or something like that. But it is quite challenging to make that recommendation given the level of detail and how much detail is in the amended permit. So just by way of feedback.
So, we know that we've got the one email from one resident. The other residents seem to be okay with this. Yes, they're not as close. This residence is being used for short-term rental. I'm not going to get into the legalities of that sort of thing. And so there's different people moving in and out on a regular basis. I am quite comfortable in putting a motion on the table to move this forward, but also, I look at this sort of thing and go, we're here now, we've got, whether there's new rules or maybe we erred in what we put forward before, we're getting appropriate recommendations by staff. And I'm quite prepared to move this forward because construction is well underway, and I'd like to see this move forward. We're going to start seeing that golf course being developed as well, and there'll be some sort of amenities with landscaping just with a golf course as we move through. So any other questions regarding the motion? Councilor Lucen?
Thank you, Marcels. When it comes to the patio, I think that is one of the bigger issues that we're trying to figure out right now. When it comes to the noise and privacy, would it be out of line to look to have the patio railing not be glass and have it be an enclosed patio?
So we can ask our building officials about how those things work and product versus another product.
Just for clarification, Your Worship. Councillor Lucio, are you looking for tools to enforce that it be enclosed or options and recommendations we can make on top of this application?
Recommendations that we could make to send this back to the proponent.
So, Mr. Gibbs, any comment? If I don't know what materials are appropriate to go around a deck, the beauty of glass is you get to see the landscaping when you're looking at it. I have all glass around all of my home. It's great to have, and it still buffers the sound to some degree. I think if there's something solid, you're going to have an echo is my feeling, but I'm not a professional sound person.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. At the end of the day, I'm not by any means professional sound technician as well, but ultimately, I would say as long as for us, the big thing is that it's got to comply with BC building code requirements, obviously for height and design, but the actual material that it's built out of, that's truly kind of left to performing character requirements, as well as depending on what the developer is hoping to achieve out of the design. But ultimately, it's not a restricting matter under the Building Act to be able to determine material type or something like that. So I'll leave that at council's discretion.
So one of the beauties of what I see here as far as height goes, and I don't have the height before the roof, but when we have something like that, I'm not seeing, in my experience, so I have my deck, for example, because it's lower down, my sound's going to be projected out over the deck if there's going to be sound. When it's higher up, there's less, it's more dissipated, and it's not necessarily directed out. I have a home that's next door to me that has that higher thing. I don't even know that they're there. I have a home that's half a block away, and where it's a shorter distance, then that sound's projected out. So when I look at this sort of thing, I see that sound's going to dissipate. and probably dissipate up versus going down, so. Did you have something, Councillor Orlando, or you want me to go back to staff?
No, I have a question, but this is not timely right now. I need staff.
All right. Does what I'm saying make any sense to you, or am I just blowing smoke?
To your worship, I've been, again, just scouring through the development permit area guidelines to see if there's a solution here for council to kind of give some direction. I mean, there's stuff in here where building features such as balconies and decks should be complementary to the character and materials of the building. That's kind of the closest one, if council did want to direct some changes to the materials. But I think, again, just trying to understand what is the nature of the impact that we're trying to mitigate here. If it is strictly noise, then we have the condition for decibels that are limited. If it's the impact of privacy and council doesn't want to see a balcony here, because remember, that's one of 4 amendments to this permit. And I just want to make sure that we're not losing sight of that, because if council doesn't have concerns with the other 3 amendments, then we can put those to the side for now and let's talk just about the balcony. And if the concern of the balcony is with privacy, then it's like, okay, well, what is the guideline that gives us that authority to say you are restricted from having this here as part of the form and character provisions because of the impact that it's going to have on privacy, right? And is there a way to mitigate that impact? There's existing landscaping. It's again about 32 meters away from the dwelling itself. They're just 13 to 14 meters away from the property line. It's riparian area that separates the properties. Again, just trying to understand, I guess, what the root of the concerns are so that we can find the appropriate tool to either mitigate that concern or give council the authority to say, proponent, go and change your proposal in X, Y, and Z ways.
So if we're under the general understanding that all the other ones, the other 3 are okay, it's just the patio and how it's presented, is that your concern? So I'll go around the table. Councillor Stephenhurst.
I'll let others go first. Thank you, Your Worship.
Councillor Orlando, comment?
Your Worship, just a quick question. So I was under just a detail thing that came up as a result of discussion. My assumption was the neighbor is a residential property, but the mayor talked about perhaps it being not. So what is the property zone for next door?
It's resort fringe, but it's being utilized as short-term rental, correct?
Through your worship to Councillor Orlando, so it holds the resort fringe land use designation in the official community plan, but it currently is zoned, it's still zoned under CSRD zoning bylaw. So it's RR2, rural residential 2 hectare zone within CSRD bylaw 851, which is a pretty restrictive zone that basically allows you to have a single family house and some minor agriculture. And this is where, again, as part of the zoning bylaw project, we're going to give the Thomas Brook community city zoning so that they don't have the CSRD zoning anymore. But it's still currently under the CSRD zoning. So again, if I know historically it was used as a short-term rental, I'm not sure if it's still operating that way. But if it is, that's not permitted under CSRD zoning bylaw 851 for the RR2 zone.
Your Worship, just a quick follow-up. Would it be considered under the proposed new zoning as a resort fringe?
Through your worship, where we're at right now with the zoning bylaw project is that all the Thomas Brook communities, except for those that have already gone through a prior rezoning process, are going to get a rural residential zoning. And then if they wish to change to do some form of tourist accommodation, they can go through a rezoning process. But again, as we work through that project, if council directs changes to that, then staff can definitely change so that short-term rental is permitted within those areas as well.
So like in essence, just to cover, like if they could apply to become an accommodator and since that is the highest land lift on the property, it seems likely, and that's past use, so that's what it will wind up to be. So the consideration is not about privacy to an extent, philosophically looking down the road towards a residential property, but potentially something that is zoned for accommodation, or could potentially be, or has the ability to apply to be. So.
Correct. Through your worship, staff, we have a zone that would be supported under this land use designation that would allow them to do a commercial operation to have up to 8 units, whether that's tourist cabins or a lodge that would be providing short-term accommodation, or you could do it as a standard single-family home that's going to be used for short-term rental.
Thank you.
Councillor Stapleton.
No, I'll refrain from my comments right now. Thank you.
All right, so getting back to my question, are you okay with us moving this forward, or do we need to make amendments or variances at some point here for our staff to go back to the developer on?
Your Worship, it sounds like a number of the variances, sorry, a number of the issues aren't being
Contended.
Yeah, are contentious for this council. It might be better to move those forward and then have a follow-up conversation about the ones that are.
Okay, so that's actually what I'm trying to get down to, Councilor Cherry. So I look at it, so we've got 4.1, which is basically site plan, architectural plans, material palette, that sort of thing. Are you guys okay with that?
Yes.
Okay. Basically, the land described herein substantially developed in accordance with the plans contained in Schedule A, which are attached. So part of that will have the patio on it. And then what about the part that goes over the road that goes to the other building? Are you okay with those things? And then the other one is just landscaping. So am I correct with that, Mr. Simon? Have I nailed everything or not?
Through your worship, the way that we structured this permit for ease of administration, so schedules A through H in the permit have not been changed. So the only thing that's changed with this permit that's being presented to council right now, schedules A through H will stay the same. The condition respecting closing the windows that can't open has been taken off. And then schedule I has been added, which outlines the scope of the development permit amendment. So kind of earlier to Councilor Orlando's point at having to do kind of a compare and contrast, we didn't want council to have to do that. So we wanted to say Schedule A contains the scope of the development permit amendment. So all design features need to be aligned with Schedule I as well as Schedule A. Schedule A is with the original approval and then Schedule I is the amended approval.
So when I get back to the amended approval, if this council isn't wanting to put all of those amendments through, can we drop one and have discussion at that at another time? Or is that something that we need to deal with now because they're in mid-construction?
Through your worship, trying to think of how council could structure this as a resolution, because it doesn't sound like there's any issues with the material changes. You know, it's an upgrade from what was previously approved, so that's that higher quality aesthetic. So if council wanted to, and maybe the corporate officer can help me out a little bit here. If council wanted to issue the permit subject to the provision that the patio be removed, you know, we could have that in the resolution. We are kind of walking on thin ice again as to whether or not that is subject to challenge, because again, there's not really a DPA guideline that would restrict that in my review of the DPA guidelines. Then essentially the applicant, if they wanted the patio, would be coming back forward for another development permit amendment to specifically include the patio. So you might be in the same boat again in a couple months or whatever the time is, and how that impacts the construction schedule. I couldn't say at this point.
So when I look at this, so we've got a patio already at the Rockford. There's a patio outside, fairly large patio. The center square, that center square has outdoor music, they're playing there. That's going to far outweigh that 45 decibel that they need to abide by on here. We've just gone through a pandemic. That first thing we talk about is getting outside, having some deck space, that sort of thing. I look about those who are coming to the community. It's a smaller deck. It's well enhanced. I don't think it's going to change the privacy level. I don't believe it's going to change the bound by the noise, that sort of thing. And I think we need to allow them to open windows. When I think about egress and that sort of thing, should there ever be an issue with fire trying to get people out. So I'm quite prepared to put this motion forward the way it is, because I think it's appropriate, and it's moving things forward. You know, bearing in mind, yes, there is one resident who's concerned about the noise and the privacy and has been on this since day one and has expressed their opinion and concern. I get that. But by the same token, I'm looking at the overall picture. This is on the resort. This is a way moving forward. This resort has seemed to have bent over backwards with a lot of things to make sure that this is a positive moving forward. So If I put this motion on the table, is it gonna pass? That's, that's my concern, and, I don't want to be delaying, the project to carry on. There's lots of things, so that's why I'm asking council. Is there some changes that we need to make? And so, Councilor Lucia, you had brought up about a different type of material for the railing on the fence or on the patio. So what happens if we took and just allowed them to use the glass, but had it an opaque covering on that glass so that you can't look down, you can't see through? Would that be amenable to you?
That could work. Another thought is if the deck is covered, it will help mitigate the noise as well as make it more usable throughout the winter time.
You mean the ability to put sliding glass on it or something? Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, just like something to enclose the space so it's still outdoors. You can still have clear glass above the railing. So you're still able to see the landscape and the mountain views, but maybe it would help mitigate the noise as well as make it useful throughout all the seasons.
Okay. Would that be something that we could potentially suggest to the proponent?
Through your worship, I think that, again, we have the one DPA guideline, building features such as balconies or decks should be complementary to the character and materials of the building. So I think maybe it's a little bit of a stretch, but I think if council wanted to rely on that DPA guideline, again, the applicant has worked in very good faith with us, so I can't imagine it would be something that would be so significant. But yeah, any direction we can get to mitigate any impacts as council sees right now would be certainly appreciated, and trying to do it as part of this permit right now, so that we don't see a future amendment come forward for a third time with this application.
Okay, so can we amend that, Councilor Lucia, can we amend that and put that in our motion as you suggested, and see if we can put that forward?
Yep.
Okay. Does that make sense? I guess I'm quite concerned we have something that Ms. Delassalle could work with as far as a motion. Ms. Floyd, do you have some suggestions for us?
Sure, Your Worship. Is it only the railing that we're dealing with right now?
Well, rather than just the railing, so if we made the railing part opaque, like the frosted glass on the bottom, so now we've got the privacy concern dealt with. And then, as Councilor Lucia was saying, above that railing, some sort of glass enclosure to mitigate sound, but also give it use all year round. Mr. Simon, comment.
Through your worship, one thing to be aware of, and you had already mentioned it, COVID, the impact of COVID as well, open air patios. I do think though, if council wanted to issue the permit subject to the condition that a material that mitigates privacy impacts is used for the railing as opposed to glass, that's something that council, if that is the concern that you're trying to get at, because it is already covered, it does already have a full canopy cover over it, as you see in the renderings. So that the design has accounted for how can they manage the noise from there, and it is already reduced capacity on there as well.
Right.
So certainly something that can be explored, and if council wanted to issue the permit subject to the condition that materials for the patio be revised so that they are not glass and enhance privacy, something along those natures. I think that's something that the proponent could then work with, and staff would work with them to make sure that that is addressed through the development permit stage.
Okay. Councilor Lucia, are you okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to make that motion?
Yeah.
And so we've now got the motion on the table, development permit amendment be issued for the construction of a hotel at 2955 Camosi Road with that amended privacy
Subject
to. All right. Now, do I have a seconder for that motion? And I will second that motion. Okay. All right, any further discussion on the motion on the table? Councilor Devlin.
Yeah, Through the chair, just kind of comment, and then I'll be asking questions of staff in a minute. I'm starting to sound like Councillor Palmer. I'm just trying to explain kind of more why I'm struggling with this. It isn't specifically for me, and I can't speak for other councillors, so much an issue of noise or privacy, because I believe that we've kind of covered how those things are mitigated through other things, landscaping, et cetera, distance between. I'm struggling with this because it seems to me, and this is just seems to me, and other than anecdotal things, I don't have any way to confirm or deny this. It seems to me that was a very specifically the no windows opening on the west side was a very specific condition put onto the DP originally. Now, my issue with that is I don't understand A, the legalities behind that, or B, the rationale behind that. I don't really know why they did that. So to take that, and then that has also come to council, not us, but previous council once before, and that was denied based again on rationale I don't fully understand. And so to take that away, to me, feels like something I should understand, make a wholesome decision about, because it sounds like it's been important the entire process. It sounds like it's something that's been discussed in depth. It's something that's been considered in depth. It's something that I presume these conversations about, is this a thing we can do? What are the DPAs? It has been discussed. So I'm missing some context.
Okay, let me weigh in because I sat at the table before, and it was basically about noise, not having noise going out, projected out. So there was one councillor that said, hey, let's just make the windows non-opening. Nobody thought about egress, and there was no recommendation from staff at that time to deal with that. We also dealt with an issue of garbage removal. How was that going to happen? Garbage trucks coming in, and I think there was a certain time that they were going to come in and that sort of thing. There was all kinds of things discussed that we're trying to deal with that. But nobody talked about the helicopters flying over or continuing that sort of thing. And nobody talked about where were the holes going to be on the golf course, because those things hadn't been planned out yet. So that was the reasoning behind that window. It was noise mitigation.
I think just to carry on, and then I'm going to ask a question to staff.
Okay, sorry.
No, that's okay. I'm not offended by that at all. And I hope you're not offended by this comment because it's not meant to be offensive, but it is on record how you voted last time, and therefore, like, that's one perspective. And unfortunately, I want to hold something, but I'm not going to get that. I understand I'm not going to get that.
And so how did I vote?
You were in favor of the previous one.
Okay.
There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying that was the wrong choice, or I'm not implying anything with that. I'm simply saying that is one perspective. I'm not going to get a wholesome. So what I'm going to do in order to make up my mind is I'm going to ask a very clear question of Director Simon, as I respect Director Simon, and I believe he does a very good job. Is it your opinion? I don't know if you're comfortable giving a yes or no, but as close to a yes or no as you're ever comfortable giving, as I know you're, the way you speak. Is it your opinion that the no opening windows on the west side is not a thing that council or a development permit should ever have put in place? Is that your professional opinion?
Through your worship, Councillor Devlin, yes. When I look through the applicable development permit area guidelines, I don't see the justification for it. And if we were challenged on that, I would not be comfortable going and representing the city or being a subject matter expert or witness or whatever the situation is to justify the imposition of that development permit area condition.
Okay. Then just to clarify the comment, I'm going to vote in support of this simply because the staff expert has said that this is a thing that, in his opinion, we need to do. So I don't like it, but I'm going to do it.
Councillor Orlando, then Councillor Stickers.
I didn't have any.
Okay, Councillor Stickers.
When we're looking at the quality of windows and looking at the subject of noise, can we make any kind of recommendation as council that the type of windows are such that prohibit or greatly reduce the amount of noise that travels through them when the windows are closed? Because we all know that there's varying degrees of quality of windows, and if we can kind of increase the quality of window to reduce the noise, maybe that'll helpfully mitigate some of the issues that we're hearing about today.
Through your worship, I am going to defer to Mr. Gibbs as I double check to see if I can find a development permit area guideline that will give you that ability.
Mr. Gibbs.
So that would be something that I would err on the side of caution with, is that I would still fall in that area of a item regulated by the building code, being that the building code regulates the standards that windows have to comply to, the energy efficiency requirements of them. And so there is the concern that if we were to say that, yes, they must meet the certain sound transmission requirements, then that would be pushing it beyond what the BC building code, or pushing it to a window that may not comply with the requirements of that, which again, then that is considered a restricted manner because that is governed by the BC building code. Now, something like the colors of the window frame, stuff like that, that could be restricted. However, the actual window itself, the performance of the window,
Triple pane, double pane, etc.
exactly, right? That would be regulated through the BC building code and the BC energy code. So that would fall under that restricted manner. And, I just, again, probably a little further, further to the kind of Councillor Devlin's statement before as well, like this act came into effect a few years back prior to the original development permit. However, it was not something that was broadly talked about. It was not something that was broadly, that knowledge base was kind of limited for a lot of people until closer to about 2021, when further restrictions of that act came into effect. And so it is one of those areas where it's now come over the last couple of years that more and more people within the industry are starting to have a better understanding of what that truly means, the restrictions and challenges associated with it.
And through your worship, I did, if I may.
Yes.
Through your worship, Councillor Stapler, we do have a development permit area guideline in here, and again, would have been crafted before the legislation that Mr. Gibbs is referring to came into effect, but nonetheless, we do have it within our zoning bylaw that does say site planning should provide for adequate separation between uses to mitigate or eliminate potential conflict issues. So, mitigation may include a variety of things, and then window location, setback screening, and then design features such as window glazing or soundproofing or shielding of lighting to provide for privacy and reduction of noise and glare. So there is a reference in here to, window glazing and soundproofing. So if council wanted to put something on there, subject to the conditions that Councillor Lucio has put on there, and that the glass windows on the patio be soundproofed accordingly in accordance with the development permit area guidelines. Again, I don't want to be stepping on too much toes there, and there's that little bit of conflict, but I think that staff and the applicant are getting the direction that council is going, and we can work together to try and make sure we mitigate those impacts as best as possible.
Councillor Stapler.
A question through the chair to Councillor Lucio. So if I'm understanding this correctly, would it be at this time Councillor Lucio taking his?
We could add that to his amendment if that's what you're asking.
Yes, exactly.
You okay with that?
Yes.
Okay, I'm okay with it as seconding that as well. So can you add that to that, Ms. Floyd? And then, so I'd like to call the question here momentarily. Can we just kind of get a revised motion read back to us? Does that make sense? Ms. Delassalle, are you able to read something back to us regarding revised motion?
I'll do my best, Your Worship.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
That development permit amendment be subject to condition that materials of patios are not glass and enhance privacy, and that window materials include, and I'm sorry, I didn't catch quite what Director Simon had said, but that window materials include sufficient glazing and privacy features or soundproofing. Is that?
I think you pretty much nailed it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, through your worship, again, I think, not to complicate it more, but we got the patio that had the glass on it, and then we're saying remove the glass, but then we're saying make sure that the glass is soundproofed on the patio, so.
No, I think we're talking about the windows here.
Okay, on the
That's
whole
what,
western
yeah.
side of the building, okay.
Right, windows that open, but appropriate windows for that soundproof. Mr. Black.
Just to throw some more chaos, I think we need to define what the sound levels are that are going to be looked at in this.
Well, so we've already got in there 45 decibels. So I mean, if you've got standard windows, So we have to understand that developer has building a hotel that will need to mitigate noise from helicopters landing. It's probably already in their work plan.
And so just to be clear, your worship, that the glazing system employed in the hotel will ensure that 45 decibels at the property line? Is that more specific, just so that the developer has something to aim for?
Okay, well, that makes sense because that aligns with what's been passed. Okay, does that make sense to you as well? That makes sense to you, Counselor?
Yes.
Okay. How about all of council? All right. Okay, so I'd like to call this question. Councillor Lucio has informed me he wanted to, he had a previous engagement and he's already 11 minutes past that. So I'd like to call the question and hopefully we'll get this moved on. So any other comments from council before I call the question? Councillor Roland.
Just the new wording.
Okay. Can you read that out again, Ms. Delisle?
Certainly. That development permit amendment DP 2018-01 be issued for the construction of a hotel at 2955 Camosi Road, subject to the condition that materials of patio are not glass and enhance privacy, and that windows have sufficient glazing and soundproofing to align to the 45 decibel requirement previously noted.
And I think I'll go back to that saying it doesn't, we don't need to remove the glass, but that they'll work with staff or they'll find something that allows them privacy on that. I think that was the intention. Is that correct?
I wasn't part of this. If I could just make a suggestion that
Sure.
instead of saying are not glass, to say are not transparent.
Right, not transparent. That makes sense. Thank you for that, Councillor Devlin. So could you amend that instead of saying not glass, that it's not transparent, Ms. Delisle?
Yes, I've done that.
Okay.
Before you call the question, Worship, I just want to ask one last question.
Yes.
Through the staff. Through the chair to Director Simon, do you feel that what we've crafted is something we're able to do under a DP and our area guidelines?
Through your worship, based on the noise impact assessment that's been provided, that's already appended, you guys are kind of piggybacking off of that. You're looking at materials of the patio to mitigate the land use conflicts. I would say yes, that this is aligned.
Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. All right. Seeing no other amendments, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? No, motion's carried unanimously. Thank you all for your time and for us getting to an amended version that makes sense. All right. Thank you, Councillor Lucio, for your time. I want to move on to 13A communications, Rolleston Area Economic Development Minutes. Councillor Orlando, that's your portfolio. Do you want to speak to that?
Your Worship, I will I'll go really quickly through it, just because it's getting real hot and late. And thanks to the Economic Development Commission members for their things. So there was a quick update on Indigenous training for city staff and the department annual report for 2023. CAO Mr. Parliament was there as acting director, provided an update on airport plans and as well as a little bit of an update on the multi-use facility. This was back on the April 10th meeting. Ms. Moffat provide some housing inventory statistics to the commission. We scheduled a Downing Timber site visit on April 17th, which we have since taken and had subsequent discussions about that at our most recent meeting. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Any questions for Councillor Orlando on that? Councillor Devlin?
Just a point of clarification. Did you say that the CAO was there? The minutes say he was not there for comment.
Saw that.
I'm just curious. I mean, it's a point of.
Was this the Was this the?
Can I leave early?
Did you leave early and you did it last meeting? That's right. Yeah, sorry. So he came the next meeting and provided update, thus my confusion. Thank you for pointing that out. I do appreciate it. But the plane has landed, so at that update. So, thank you.
Councilor Terry, APC.
Thanks, Your Worship. Just quickly, we had a small agenda, but it's still a few hours of conversation. The APC got the chance to look at a rezoning application from RR2 up on Cedar Street to facilitate a 3-lot subdivision. It would be single and 2 family residential zones. On top of that, we also were presented with the zoning bylaw draft zones to take a peek at. It's very brief, guys. It's late. Unless you'd like more information
No, that's
about
good.
the zoning application,
Appreciate it.
I think you're all aware. of
Any
the-
questions for Councilor Terry? Councilor Devlin, give it to him.
Yeah, just 5 words or less. What is the APC's general thoughts on the zoning bylaw comprehensive rewrite as they saw the draft?
So they didn't have enough time to review every single zone.
That's more
So
than 5
they'll
words.
be
Good.
coming back.
Just positive, negative, but if they haven't, then they haven't.
All right, and item C, City of Revelstoke. So I wrote a letter to the Minister of Housing, inviting him to come visit Revelstoke and see all the good things that we've done. This letter was crafted with input from staff, especially Development Services Department. And so we'll see. We haven't got a response yet, but I want to thank Mr. Ellisell and Mr. Simon for coming up with a good letter.
I hope you added PS, bring BC Housing.
No, I didn't bring it. I didn't put that on this time. Anyway, all right. Mr. Ellisell, do we have any questions from the press?
There are no questions from the press, Your Worship.
All right. So, Council, I'd like to go in camera pursuant to Section 90.1 D and E of the Community Charter. Someone want to make that motion? Councilor Staples, Councilor Devlin, all in favor? Motion's carried. We will go in camera.
Quick break or no?
No.
Yeah, we can, if you need to use the washroom, quick break.